Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 7442 Renewed Terran Pride. Chapter 7442 Renewed Terran Pride. The Green Belt did not merely serve as a new defensive band. As soon as Master Layla Rebecca DeVos announced its existence, it became a symbol. Its existence signified that the Terran Alliance not only possessed the determination to halt the alien advance, but turn its borders into an impregnable green barrier. The political cost of failing in its promise to hold back the aliens would be great. The leaders of the Terran Alliance were certainly making a big gamble by making such a high-profile announcement. Yet it was exactly because it sounded so grand and optimistic that it shot another dose of confidence in the Terran people. Many of them felt proud that their colonial star empire projected strength in its message. It provided a strong and obvious contrast with the Terrans under the subjugation of the Meshers and Fleeters. During the Age of Mechs, the Terrans had to bow their heads time and time again. The Big Two seemed to relish in humiliating the first-rate superstates by imposing all kinds of rules and indignities. The loss of sovereignty and the limitations on military buildup had not only neutered the national strength of the Terran superstate, but also inflicted severe trauma on its pride. During those long centuries, the Terrans merely held up a facade of strength and sophistication. Even if they still managed to rank at the top of first-rate states, they could never truly express themselves as freely so long as the big bad MTA and CFA loomed over their heads. Times had changed. The Terran Alliance had willfully escaped the shackles of the Red Two. The Terrans solemnly assumed the burdens and responsibilities of a sovereign star nation. If they failed, then the Terrans would not only suffer grievous losses, but also turn their attempt to return to independence into a farce. Nothing would doom their national pride more than to crawl back to the Meshers and the Fleeters and beg for their protection. Fortunately, it shouldn't come to that so long as the Green Belt lived up to its promise. What played in their favor was that the Terran Alliance currently did not have to confront the threat posed by the mutated Vorabugs. Though it was difficult to estimate how rapidly the Vorabug race expanded across the stars, the Rebarthan Pact and to a lesser extent the Red Ocean Union would still face the brunt of this alien threat. This meant that the Terrans faced less pressure to lower their pride and proactively seek cooperation with other powerful groups such as the Cybernetic Empire. Of course, the unwillingness to make heavy concessions in exchange for military and economic assistance also meant that the Terran Alliance would be missing out on many opportunities. Though the Rebarthans had paid a heavy price, they also forged tighter partnerships with other advanced and powerful players. This might end up helping them in the long run, though only if they successfully repelled the mutated Vorabugs. The Terrans looked down on the Rebarthans, of course. VS thought that this was a short-sighted attitude, but the Terrans really did not want to become subjugated by other parties in any way ever again. The best way to do so was to prove with their actions that they could take care of themselves. As Master Layla Rebecca DeVos went into further detail about the scope and specifications of the Green Belt, the attendees quietly exchanged their opinions about what they learned. The Green Belt is a defensive means of exploiting the rapid regeneration capabilities of Woodsap Mechs. Saint Commander Casella Ingvar noted. What is interesting is that Master DeVos has not mentioned that your Woodsap Mechs can also fight at an advantage when they are on the attack. Their monstrous ability to sustain themselves well past the breaking or exhaustion point of other mechs can make a huge difference when assaulting alien-held planets. The more life they bear, the more difficult it is to defeat an invading force of Woodsap Mechs. That was a very sharp observation. She must already be thinking on how to best employ the prototype Woodsap Mechs that would be accompanying the Larkinson clan in the upcoming military campaign. There are limits to how extensively most Woodsap Mechs can sustain themselves by draining the natural environment. VS quietly warned. Unless the ecosystems of the planets are particularly rich in mid to high-grade exotics and hypers, constant repairs and replenishment will ultimately degrade the physical properties of the biomechs. There is a lot of advanced and ingenious biotech and e-tech that goes into filtering and concentrating the most useful materials out of any environment, but there are ultimately hard limits. The Terrans will still need to grow high-quality Gaia trees and transplant them onto the necessary planets if they want to ensure that the Woodsap Mechs remain in optimal condition over the long term. Even so, there were still many cases where it was always better to field whole but more fragile mechs as opposed to machines that were already half-broken. What about the circumstances where the Woodsap Mechs are forced to fight without these favorable conditions? Saint Dice asked with an intrigued voice. Then they are literally fighting out of their element, I guess. VS shrugged his shoulders. Woodsap mechs are not omnipotent. No mech is omnipotent. They fight best when surrounded by nature. Their performance ceiling progressively worsens the further away they are from any form of nature or source of plant life. This is also why we are investing seriously into the development of Gaia trees. Any starship can carry them and deploy them in open space if necessary. Their presence will give Woodsap mechs a localized advantage, even if they have to fight many light hours away from the nearest life-bearing planet. The limitations on Woodsap mechs may seem troublesome, but it was ultimately a matter of logistics. As long as the Terrans grasped the strengths and weaknesses of the new biomechs and made adequate preparations, they should never put the Woodsap mechs where they had to fight at a heavy disadvantage. Saint Commander Casella Ingvar understood this very well. It is good news for the Terrans and all of us that most pitched battles so far have taken place in orbit of important planets. The requirement of a source of nature in close proximity can easily be satisfied. Humans rarely find it pleasant to live and work on lifeless balls of rock or water. That was true. Many of the settled planets used to bear alien life or had been terraformed to accept terrestrial life. These globes would form the initial foundation of the green belt. It was not enough, though. Not every pioneer bothered to plant their settlements onto life-bearing planets. There were many cases where colonists built up settlements on barren planets without feeling the need to introduce the gift of life. Terraforming was expensive and could impose delays. Many groups considered this to be an extravagant form of treatment for planetary resource extraction sites. Whatever the case, the calculus had changed. Terraforming businesses would definitely experience a massive boom in the short term. The Aduk family must be doing really well these days, Saint Tusa remarked. They used to be second-raters, but now that they are cooperating more actively with the Terrans, their terraforming business must have experienced a massive upgrade. It is the Aduk clan now. VS responded with a smile. As the caretakers of the tree that Gaia has anchored herself to, the Aduks have always enjoyed the deity's favor. The Terrans recognize that and have rewarded them heavily for their services. I do not think it is a coincidence that a scion of the Aduk clan holds the title of the first elf. This development actually caught him off guard. He never had an idea that the Aduks chose to play such a big game. He also didn't know how the Aduk clan managed to integrate so well and so rapidly within the Terran power structure. Nonetheless, he felt happy for their success. Their rise not only showed that the Terrans possessed a willingness to open themselves up to outsiders, but also put one of the Larkin Sun clan's business partners and allies in a position of power. However, VS was well aware that the Aduks had tied their names tightly to the Elven initiative. If this ever ended up blowing in the Terran Alliance's face, the Aduk clan could fall as rapidly as it rose. Saint Janzi never let up her suspicious gaze. The Aduks have chosen to swim in dangerous waters. From what I recall, they used to be cultists, if on the milder side. Nevertheless, I think it is irresponsible for them to push for the creation of the elf race and put one of their own in charge no less. There is no way that relations between humans and elves will remain harmonious. Multiple nearby Larkin Sun ace pilots adopted tired expressions. They had heard about her suspicions towards the elven race multiple times. Not everyone was patient enough to tolerate her alarmist statements. Shut up, Janzi. Saint Devia Stark bit back. We can all tell that you genuinely care about red humanity, but it is not as if the elves pose a threat on the same level as the native aliens or the mutated vorabugs. There are plenty of clever people in our civilization that can think of the same dangers as you. Their plans and foresight are much greater than a soldier such as you. What do you think you can do on your own? You do not understand what is at stake, mercenary. Janzi hissed back. Didn't you listen to what the Terrans have said? They have forsaken the doctrine of human supremacy. This is the first step of the fall human race as we know it. The definition of what counts as human will be stretched even further in the next years and decades. The cybers will continue to digitize themselves until they hardly have any organic cell left in their bodies. The Rubarthans are already talking about producing highly deviant batch humans on an even greater scale than the cybernetic empire in order to feed enough bodies to their straining armed forces. Even the Red Ocean Union is host to dozens of different transhuman initiatives. Perhaps it won't take more than a generation before there is not a single normal human left in the Red Ocean. Though Janzi sounded paranoid, her words still rang true to many people's ears. Transhumanism was a fact of life in the new frontier. The external pressures had grown too great. The belief in the purity of humanity became increasingly more irrelevant as a consequence. High-minded ideas about preserving one's humanity had lost their value when red humanity could not even guarantee its own survival. So what if the Terrans sought to turn a significant part of their population into elves? As long as it made them stronger, then it was worth it even if they invited racial conflict in the future. At worst, the Terrans could either eradicate the elves after they had served their purpose, or complete the conversion of the rest of their human population. Whatever awful future the Terrans had in store, they at least retained the luxury of having a future in the first place. This was why VS disagreed with Janzi's stance. Janzi, he addressed her directly. You are entitled to hold and voice your own opinions. Our clan never seeks to muzzle diverging voices. However, you should take into account that our clan and I are officially collaborating with the Terran Alliance on the Arboreal project. Elves have become inextricably intertwined with our work. We, and by that I mean our clan, should not do anything that can disrupt our ongoing cooperation. If you are opposed to the creation of the elves, then you should at least make it clear that you do not represent the standpoint of our clan. His irritable cousin crossed her arms in frustration. You do not need to remind me of that, VS. I am not going to ruin your little green project. I just find it regretful that you chose to make it exclusive to our current hosts. Others could sorely need their advantages. Why must the green belt be confined to the Terran Alliance? Exclusivity increases investment, Janzi. Without assuring that the Terrans will own whatever they make with me, they would have never gone all out into developing powerful functions like the hibiscus system. What is even more important is that the Terrans have set an example for others. Once the Arboreal project has proven to be a massive success, other major powers will work hard with us to develop their own exclusive elemental Carmine mechs. While they won't share their flagship Carmine mechs with each other, the overall outcome will definitely be better because of how much more they have committed to their own works. VS already received increasingly more insistent messages from his other collaboration partners. From the Cybernetic Empire to the Hunting Association, each of them finally recognized the full value of his elemental Carmine mechs. He would not be short on high-level collaboration opportunities in the future, that was for certain. Chapter 74-43 Bound Interests. Chapter 74-43 Bound Interests. The rest of the presentation offered no further surprises as far as VS was concerned. Once Master Layla Rebecca DeVos had completed her exposition on grand subjects such as the Green Belt, she went back to providing a basic technical overview of the many variants of the Arboreal project. The mech design project possessed a massive scope that was far beyond VS had initially envisioned. He had started out with working on his Woodsap mechs by conceiving of a single base model before imagining a couple of variants. Evidently, that was far from enough to the Terrans. They wanted to develop a complete system of solutions that could fill in the well-defined roles of their existing armed forces. VS found this approach to be a bit contradictory. First Raiders loved their first-class multipurpose mechs, which had been designed to function adequately in most conventional combat scenarios. Despite the dominance of this design approach, the First Raiders still recognized the strategic value of specialization. Perhaps it was better to look at first-class multipurpose mechs as multidimensional platforms that just so happened to possess a single strong focus or advantage. That seemed like a silly approach to VS, but then again he did not start out as a first-class mech designer. From the perspective of a third raider or second raider, the First Raiders were simply designing their mechs in a similar fashion, only they insisted on cramming lots of unnecessary and redundant miniaturized weapon systems into their mech frames. The only reason why this approach hadn't been deemed stupid was because first-class technologies truly achieved massive leaps on miniaturization. Mechs could do a lot more while taking up a lot less capacity. While VS felt it may be better to dedicate even more space to a couple of weapon systems at most in order to maximize their effectiveness, most First Raiders evidently believed that it was worthwhile to trade that away for versatility. VS could not argue against this common standard. The Premier Fleet definitely enjoyed the universal applicability of well-designed first-class multipurpose mechs such as the Dracoloids and the Omega Threshers. In any case, the Terran mech designers had taken responsibility over designing the specific variants of the Arboreal project. VS knew from the start that he was outmatched in this aspect. It was better to let his clients decide on the specifications of all of the variants. They certainly had the design talent to spare. He actually found it refreshing to collaborate with Master Layla Rebecca DeVos and other highly competent mech designers. They regularly outclassed him in many useful specializations such as weapon systems and biotechnology. He could always count on them to develop elegant solutions for the Arboreal project. Of course, that also came with downsides such as loss of control and bouts of secrecy. He still felt sore about being kept in the dark about the Elven initiative. Though VS did not feel as much ownership over all of the eclectic variants developed by the Terrans, he did not mind it too much. He lacked the time to supervise all of these sub-projects on an individual basis. He had to force himself to let go and trust in the competence of his Terran collaborators. From what he could surmise so far, his partners did not disappoint him in the slightest. Although they still could not quite make heads and tails of the Woodsap system and many of the traits associated with his design philosophy, that did not stop them from treating his design solutions as modules that they could build around. VS felt a strong sense of validation when he saw that the Terran's mech designers respect his work and make proper use of his solutions. Their mature and rational approach towards his living mechs indicated that his works not only helped to further the advancement of the mech industry, but also had a good chance to become a central fixture in their national strategy in the times to come. Perhaps this was what would truly help him become a master mech designer. It was not enough for VS to design amazing mechs. It was only when they became good enough to achieve widespread adoption at this scale that he felt that it had been worth it to pursue his grand ambitions. Perhaps other mech designers may already feel pleased by achieving a fraction of his current accomplishments, but that had never been enough for a holder of the mech designer system. Though he had not been born a first-rater, VS believed he had been given a much better chance of achieving greatness in this field. He could not hold himself to the same standards because that would be no different from betraying his own expectations. Not too long after he obtained the mech designer system and gained a decent idea of its amazing potential, VS had always compared his progress to an imaginary mech designer that possessed comparable or even identical conditions. Was he making enough progress to keep up or outpace his self-defined benchmark? Was he making proper use of all of the features available to him? Was he wasting the advantages granted by the system? Though there had been many times where his questioning resulted in disappointing answers, VS still believed that his progress stayed ahead of his benchmark. Though he had deliberately impaired his progress by insisting on limiting his dependence on the mech designer system, he believed that it had been for the better, as he had come up with many ingenious innovations that could have never been realized if he remained overly dependent on external assistance. It took true ingenuity and risk-taking in order to develop revolutionary solutions such as the Carmine system and more recently the Super Destroyer system. VS believed he gained an increasingly better grasp of the essence of what constituted an ideal mech designer. So long as he combined systematic learning, unbound creativity and an eye towards practical usage, he believed he was well on his way to becoming a star designer. Of course, VS still had a long journey ahead of himself. He still needed to worry about becoming a master mech designer. At least the progress he and the Terrans made so far signaled that the Arboreal project was pretty much a done deal. The Woodsap mechs still needed to complete a large-scale field trial in order to be absolutely certain that they were good enough for mass production, but VS did not think that they would expose any massive flaws at this point. VS had confidence in his work, and the Terran mech designers definitely knew what they were doing. They only wanted additional assurances because they held themselves to a higher standard and because they made use of a lot of experimental technologies. Once Master Layla Rebecca DeVos concluded her lengthy talk, she granted the guests an opportunity to approach and speak with one of the many participants of the Arboreal project. These included mech designers and scientists who had contributed to the development of Woodsap mechs to the test pilots who had been chosen to pilot the latest batch of prototypes. VS had already met the most important mech designers and developers of the Arboreal project in prior meetings. He did not have much interest in rehashing his conversations with these fellows. He instead decided to approach the pilots and hear what they had to say about his works. Before he could reach one of them, a pair of elves accompanied by Terran bodyguards found him first. "It is an honor to meet you, Professor Larkinson." A male voice with an ethereal quality greeted him. "We wish to express our gratitude to you for making our transformation possible. Though you are not directly responsible for creating our race, you have bestowed our civilization with the goddess that made it possible and the biomech that justified our existence." VS blinked at that. The Terrans had made an effort to downplay his involvement in the Elven initiative. The second elf's words made it much more difficult to spread this narrative. This had to be deliberate on his part. VS was not naive enough to believe that a scion of a Terran ancient clan could be so oblivious. That did not reassure him. The Terrans must be a lot more divided on the Terran matter than he expected. The best thing that VS could do was sidestep this issue as much as possible. "It is good to meet you, Mr. Shuku," he plainly responded while shaking the elf's slender hand. "To be honest, I do not direct much thought on racial matters. The Age of Dawn has kicked off a wave of transhumanism that cannot be avoided. It is inevitable for every red human to evolve and change into forms that deviate significantly from what we were accustomed to in the Age of Mechs. Since that is the case, it is better to take control of the process. Since it is possible for us to convert people into human phase lords, it is not that far-fetched to engineer elves into existence." The brief moment of contact granted VS a better understanding of the second elf's condition. The man's body possessed a strong source of vitality, yet had been tainted with a more destructive force. "Interesting." The first elf spoke next. "It is reassuring for us to hear that you harbor no fear or resentment towards our creation. We had faith that your tolerance was broad enough to bless our existence." VS frowned in response. "While I am involved with numerous religious organizations, I am not a man of faith myself. I do not think my approval or disapproval grants your race any concrete strength or advantages. My apologies, Professor. It is not our intention to impress our own beliefs onto you. We elves are more intricately tied to the goddess that you have woken up. We cannot help but view our own reality through the lens of faith and belief. I couldn't help but notice that you are a member of the Oldaduck family. How are you guys doing these days?" VS changed the topic. The tall female elf smiled. "Your aid has given us a golden entry ticket into Terran society. We have met many like-minded individuals who respect what we have done. With their aid, we have reformed into a Terran-style clan. Our dedication towards Gaia has granted us the right to be at the forefront of the creation of our race. With luck and patience, we may eventually secure one of the 5 quotas to become an ancient clan. That was still a thing, apparently. The Terrans did not go back on their word with regards to the Red Ocean promise that they announced years ago. Even though much had changed since then, they still needed to attract a lot of ambitious pioneers in order to develop their limited territories further. I see, VS remarked. So your chances of becoming a proper Terran ancient clan depends on how well you can make a difference for your adopted colonial star empire. Yenya Aduk nodded in acknowledgement. We cannot deny that our future is intertwined with the success of the Arboreal project. The Elven race's fate is tied to how well the Woodsap Mechs can serve the Terrans. This is why we are grateful for your work and hope that you can continue to improve on what you have built. The more you invest into the subsequent development of Woodsap Mechs, the brighter our own future. That sounded troubling to VS. He did not like it that the elves had built up such a strong association towards one of his key accomplishments. Their controversial existence added a lot of unnecessary baggage to one of his key products. My attention is split between many different design projects and research directions. VS responded in a neutral tone. I have already directed a great amount of time and effort into the initial development of the Arboreal project. Once it is declared complete, I intend to direct my attention to other advanced Carmine mech design projects. I have already made commitments with other major partners, you see. It will largely be up to the Terrans themselves to design additional Woodsap mechs, though I am aware that it will be difficult to do so without my direct involvement. Yes, you have yet to realize your design philosophy. The first elf sounded very regretful about this fact. And I won't be able to do so for quite some time. This is why it is important for me to work on other projects. I won't be able to progress my design philosophy all that much if I keep iterating on the same mechs. I need to tackle different challenges and explore a greater variety of different ideas. The good news is that I am already certain about my path to advancement. I can assure you that the more advanced Carmine mech design projects that I complete, the closer I am to becoming a master mech designer. This is why it is to your advantage that I work on those other projects. Both elves nodded at that. They accepted his argument and knew that it was best to let VS do as he wished. Then we hope that your other collaborators will prove to be as helpful to you as our own people. Please inform us if they impose any unwelcome delays to your work. Chapter 7444 Military Commitment. Chapter 7444 Military Commitment. Though VS really felt annoyed by the attempts made by the elves to pull him into their political orbit, he still appreciated the novelty of their existence. As one of the key figures responsible for their creation, the first and second elf had a strong interest in building up a relationship with him. They apparently thought they needed more backing in order to further their interests. This made sense as Terran society had become intensely divided over the Elven initiative. The galactic net had been lit on fire ever since the initial announcement spread, and emotions only became more heated over time. The two leading elves had come under such intense pressure that their ongoing charm offensive could literally decide whether the Elven race could survive beyond this year. Naturally, obtaining the explicit support of the inventor of the Carmine system, the founder of the Red Collective and the director of the Phase Lord Department could solve a lot of problems. Unfortunately for the elves, VS did not see any reason to lend any substantial support. He still needed to maintain a certain degree of separation from the Elven initiative. The only reason for him to disregard this priority was if the benefits of allying himself with the elves exceeded the downsides. So far, he saw little of that. Perhaps the elves had a lot of promise in specialized fields, but Red humanity still maintained an overwhelming head start in all matters of development. Another reason why he felt reluctant to grant the elves a seal of approval was because they might pose a genuine threat to Red humanity in the future. Sure, the elves all made the politically correct statements of how they were simply an arboreal variant of human, but he knew how easy it was for divergent biologies to eventually identify themselves as a different or superior race. In that sense, VS partially agreed with St. Janzi's wary attitude. He still supported human supremacy, though his definition of it was much broader than normal. The creation of a new race and one that borrowed from extremely well-established myths of stories went a step too far. VS did not want to get hit in the face with the potential backlash that might occur if the elves ever decided to sever their ties to human civilization in the future. That said, he did not want to spoil his relationship with the Elven race before it could get off to a good start. The current trajectory suggested that a significant proportion of Terrans planned to convert themselves into elves. This group would definitely be weighted towards people belonging to the middle and upper layers of society. That meant that the elves would definitely wield an outsized influence over the direction of the Terran alliance in the future. In other words, VS needed to walk a tightrope when it came to the elves. He had to make a friendly impression without getting caught in their trap. We understand the fear of the common folk towards our emergence, but our creation is not as radical as they think. The first elf patiently explained her viewpoint to VS and his fellow Larkinsons. We consider ourselves to be a logical progression of an ongoing development. When you look at our civilization from a macro perspective, we have been engaging in transhumanism since the age of stars. When we compare ourselves to the many alien races of the Milky Way and Red Ocean, we often feel dissatisfied with our lack of strength, intelligence, and other traits. Since we have the technology to improve upon our inadequate baseline, many of us have embraced its possibilities to improve and build upon our foundation. There is a difference between augmenting yourself and inventing a new race, St. Janzi flatly stated. We do not share the same view, Yenya a duck elegantly replied. Human augmentation has long become ubiquitous. The introduction of so-called curated chi cultivation methods has only further lowered the barrier to entry, as even third-raters can break their mortal limits without breaking the bank. Baseline humans have long become extinct in the new frontier. This was a fact that no one could argue. Even the dullest third-class human who never came in touch with the chi cultivation methods published by the Red Collective had already mutated beyond their original biological makeup. Years of passive exposure to exotic radiation had subtly changed and altered their body, mind and spirit into a package that could easily be distinguished from a third-class human who remained in the old galaxy. You are still moving beyond established conventions of human augmentation, St. Tusa Billingsley Larkinson stated from the side. It is one thing to choose to augment yourself into a special human with pointy ears. It is another thing to create a race whose offspring will permanently inherit the same ears and other improvements. Your children and grandchildren will forever bear the consequences of your choices. You have deprived them of the right to choose. The first elf shook her head. We do not live in a utopia where choice is sacrosanct. Consider this, honorable saint. The well-established market for designer babies has long made it so that humans start off on a stronger footing from the moment of their artificial conception. This is actually an extrapolation of the older trend of augmenting the bodies of infants at an age where they lack the agency to decide on their own improvement. What we have done is merely a continuation of this existing trend. We solidified the designer baby approach so that the parents of tomorrow no longer have to undergo the tedious and expensive process of commissioning a designer baby from a genetics lab. She was technically correct, but the implications of her race went far beyond automating the designer baby process. VS mentally shook his head. What you have mentioned largely covers the physiological deviations. There is also the matter of culture and identity. Those are arguably more important changes in biology. I have personal experience on how difficult it can be for individuals with diverging physical attributes to maintain a strong connection to fellow humans. If the elven race wishes to remain welcome in human company, then it must make a concerted and united effort to maintain this bond. We are aware of this obligation and have no intention of neglecting it. The second elf sternly answered. Many elves are chosen among the ranks of soldiers who have volunteered for frontline duty. They will do their best to fight our alien enemies and defend the Terran Alliance. We have an obligation to protect any citizen of the Terran Alliance no matter the race. Whether they are human or elf is of little consequence to us. We identify ourselves as Terrans first. That was a very clear political statement, and one that should reassure the concerns of many Terrans. The elves made the correct decision to focus on the factors that bound the Terrans together as opposed to the ones that could further their division. It was a pity that not everyone intended to play along with the elves, but that was their own problem. VS did not have much interest in these issues. He would rather focus his limited attention on more relevant matters such as the upcoming military campaign. I agree that a good way to prove your commitment to protecting your people is to take your woodsap mechs to the front and put your lives on the line. He responded. To that end, how big of a force can we expect you to accompany our fleets? It will not take long for our mixed force of human and elven woodsap mechs to complete their organization. The second elf immediately answered. You can expect 120 woodsap mechs to board 4 state-of-the-art combat carriers before joining your combined fleet. They are at your Saint Commander's disposal. All we ask is that we are given plenty of chances to prove our mettle in controlled engagements against a variety of alien opponents. What are your requirements? Casella Ingvar asked. We will transmit a detailed list of requests and expectations to you, but in short we wish to test our might against equal or moderately stronger forces of enemy strike craft, warships and defensive installations without receiving any friendly military assistance. Karakala Shuku succinctly explained. We must be allowed to fight and die on our own terms in order to show the Terrans back home how much we can make difference across the Terran front. As much as we admire and appreciate your famous command field or your iconic ace mechs, they are components of the Larkinson clan. We cannot possibly extend those advantages to our own forces, nor do we have any desire to do so. Our people must stand up for our own rights. That is how it should be. VS voiced his approval. The Saint Commander looked thoughtful. It will be difficult to engineer combat scenarios where your Woodsap mech detachment can fight against a somewhat isolated force of alien assets, but it is not an impossible demand to fulfill. As long as it does not endanger my fellow Larkin sons, I have no objections to your proposal. Just be aware that if you choose to challenge the aliens on equal ground, you must be mentally prepared to accept the consequences of your own decisions. Intelligence gathering is never complete. Our forces will actively intervene to bail you out if you have bitten more than you can chew. Accidents can always happen. If the aliens have brought unexpected reinforcements, then it will take time for our own units to come to your assistance. You must bear responsibility over your own casualties. Understood, Commander. The second elf seriously responded. We will never dare to cast any blame on you for our own hubris and mistakes. We have all chosen to undertake this duty for the good of the Terran Alliance. We know that we will make sacrifices, and we are fully prepared to return with less than the original 120 prototype Woodsap mech pilots. We only hope that the losses we are bound to suffer will lead to further improvements down the line. VS nodded in affirmation. That is the purpose of testing prototypes. I have a lot of confidence in my own work, but nothing is certain until we have completed this round of field tests. We should be able to apply quick fixes and adjustments while we are operating behind enemy lines, but if we have discovered more severe problems, then you will have little choice but to put up with them for the remainder of the campaign. Personally, he did not think that it would come to this. He merely stated these words because he wanted to err on the side of caution. Now that the elves had made it clear that they would definitely accompany the Larkin sons into alien-occupied space, the barrier between the two groups had weakened to an extent. The Woodsap mechs might not constitute a large or particularly powerful force, but they could still help the Larkin sons minimize their own casualties in the upcoming battles. There was no better way to strengthen bonds of trust and camaraderie than fighting on the same battlefield. As the second elf started to mingle with the military-minded Larkin sons, VS took the first elf to the side in order to hold a more personal discussion. Let me take a closer look at this grail of rebirth. Yenya Aduk did not hesitate for a second. She freely lifted the extraordinary grail with both hands. This allowed VS to reach out and touch the surface of the carved exterior of the highly decorated grail. From the moment he did so, he came into direct contact with one of the most unique and remarkable artifacts he had come across. His eyes slightly widened as he gained a much more detailed impression of the extraordinary features that supported the green rebirth ritual. Just as she suspected, the transformation from a human and elf went far beyond a change in biology. The key to the green rebirth ritual was the complete sublimation of spirituality. Chapter 74:45 Sacrificial Duty. Chapter 74:45 Sacrificial Duty. It was well within the boundaries of human biotechnological science to alter humans into elf-like beings. After all, the stereotypical depiction of an elf was a slender humanoid with fair hair, flawless skin, and pointed ears. Even a third-class biotech company could develop simple gene mod treatments that could convert baseline humans into elf-like beings on the cheap. Yet there was a big difference between these surface modifications and the creation of a true elven race. The Terrans created the Grail of Rebirth in order to bridge this vast divide. All of the genetic and physical modifications only served as the prelude of the true transformation. Though VS could not comprehend every mechanism of the Grail of Rebirth, he could still interpret enough elements to understand the overall purpose and intent behind its existence. From the perspective of this divine artifact, the somewhat malformed human candidates who had undergone extreme augmentations could be seen as elf embryos. They were still human in essence, but possessed many of the building blocks to transform into the Terran interpretation of an elf. The only change that the wooden grail needed to facilitate was that of the soul. The spirituality of an elf was fundamentally different from that of a human. The former truly possessed many advantages that could not be acquired through ordinary effort. From developing a deep and permanent connection to Gaia to acquiring a universally strong affinity to the wood, earth and life energy attributes, elves had been shaped to master the powers of nature in an extraordinary age. VS also noted that their designers, whoever they may be, had taken special care not to replace humans entirely. Due to their extensive physical and spiritual changes, the elves all gained a bunch of powerful talents. However, such extensive specialization also weakened their strengths in other areas. For example, the elves would definitely excel at designing or piloting biomechs, but would never feel comfortable with conventional metallic mechs. Their ability to shape and channel other energy attributes also became impaired. Perhaps a few exceptional individuals might be able to wield the power of fire like a master, but they would be the exception rather than the rule. Every elf would have to confront an uphill battle if they wanted to explore domains that were far removed from typical elven activities. This was one of the main shortcomings of the elves. The first and second elf had not misspoken when they described their group as a more specialized branch of humanity that just so happened to be able to pass on their traits through natural conception. Of course, that did not exactly prevent the elves from making a play at independence. As VS continued to examine the art and craftsmanship of the Grail of Rebirth, he felt a profound appreciation as well as a bout of possessiveness. He wanted to take away the wooden grail and keep it for his own purposes. This was because he recognized one of the main aspects responsible for fueling the remarkable transformation ritual. The main reason why the Grail of Rebirth existed was to serve as a container and controller of a remarkable liquid. VS could not figure out the precise composition of this complex substance, but he could tell that it was infused with powerful energies. Chief among them was universal life energy. This was one of the few high-grade E energy variations that he had come across. Compared to the garbage-grade E energy that could easily be harvested from exotic radiation, the high-grade stuff could only be found from truly high-end sources. One of the original reasons why VS created Gaia was because he wanted to create an ancestral spirit that could function as a replenishable source of universal life energy. Unfortunately, that plan had mostly fallen through when Gaia went AWOL and decided to pursue her own path. He had made her too powerful at the start. He also suspected that borrowing the well-established myth of an old human goddess had infused her with a different identity and personality than his previous spiritual products. Whatever the case, VS had no way of persuading Gaia to supply him with her precious universal life energy. He was relatively certain that she truly possessed the ability to generate universal life energy. This should especially be the case after she ascended into a true god. That did not mean she could squander it at will. Universal life energy was extremely useful for many purposes, and VS believed that Gaia reserved most of her production to strengthen her admittedly weak and inadequate foundation. Therefore, VS never held out much hope that he could acquire a batch of universal life energy from her. Gaia simply needed it too much. Even a true god like herself had plenty to fear in the Age of Dawn. This was why the composition of the life liquid surprised VS. Its existence along with her involvement in the Elven Initiative told him that Gaia had probably completed her initial stage of accumulation and begun to expand her power base. By cooperating with the Terrans and pushing for the creation of a race that was literally programmed to worship her for life, Gaia was finally beginning to pursue her ambitions beyond mere survival. She even went as far as to expend a small but precious amount of universal life energy to facilitate every individual elf transformation. VS couldn't determine whether this was a worthwhile or wasteful investment. Universal life energy was truly precious. It could be used for so many purposes, from extending an individual's lifespan to recovering the most severely damaged organisms. He did not believe that Gaia could produce enough universal life energy to transform the entire population of the Terran population into elves. Not at this relatively early stage of her development at least. Even if he had vastly underestimated her production capacity, she would still choose to reserve most of it for her own growth. The elves may play an important role in her master plan, but they were ultimately helpers. VS slightly shook his head before withdrawing his fingers. Though he wanted to spend more time on examining the Grail of Rebirth, it would be rude for him to covet another organization's prized possession. He did not hold a monopoly on everything related to life. You are incredibly fortunate to be chosen to bear this artifact, he eventually told Yenya Aduk. As its cupbearer, you will constantly benefit from its existence. It is one of the strongest handheld sources of vitality in this dwarf galaxy. Let alone keeping you in peak health, whatever energies that it passively radiates will definitely nurture your spirituality and allow you to become a formidable chi cultivator even if you do not actively practice any method. This is especially the case for your special elf constitution, which is apparently designed with this in mind. Much like his living mechs, the elves had apparently been designed with passive cultivation in mind. Just living and breathing allowed them to grow stronger in spirit over time. Although its efficiency was not particularly high, it would still ensure that even the laziest elf could grow into a competent chi cultivator in a few years. The first elf smiled in appreciation. I appreciate your words, Professor. Carrying the Grail of Rebirth is both a reward and a burden. I have chosen to undertake this responsibility willingly. For as long as I breathe, I shall dedicate my life to serving the Mother of Earth. She is the light of my life, the star of my eyes and the benefactor of our race. That caused VS to furrow his brows. I admire your sense of duty, but be careful not to get subsumed by thoughts that do not originate from yourself. The main concern I have is that your grail is so strong that it may affect your mentality in noticeable ways. The power disparity between you and your artifact is too great. Too much exposure is not necessarily a good thing. If you want to serve your deity better, then it may be a good idea to seal it once in a while. He actually suspected that Gaia had a more nefarious purpose in mind when she bestowed this extraordinary duty on Yenya Aduk. Perhaps the deity was molding the first elf into a living avatar of herself. This sounded exactly like something that true gods might do. What would be left of the original person once Gaia descended on her small and frail elven body? Predictably, the cupbearer shook her head. I cannot accept your advice. The Grail of Rebirth must constantly be held in my hands. This is the duty that is bestowed upon me by Gaia. Whether the consequences are good or bad, I shall embrace it all the same. Even if it leads to my death or personality erasure, I will not regret my decision. My ascension as the first elf has already granted a great amount of honor and recognition to the Aduk clan. My brothers and sisters are already benefiting greatly from my sacrifice. So it was like that. VS had no way to dissuade Yenya Aduk from prioritizing her own life and well-being. She had already assumed her heavy duty knowing that she might have to sacrifice herself one day. So long as her clan and relatives got rewarded for it, she would gladly give herself up to Gaia. VS wanted to rub his face at the thought. It sounded too much like the Larkin sons. Very well, he eventually said. I am glad to hear that you are at least cognizant of what you are doing. It would be problematic if you have assumed a duty without being aware of the consequences. I have several more questions about the nature of the elven race. Please ask, though I apologize in advance if I cannot supply you with adequate answers. Many secrets are withheld from my ears. The amount of confidential information that I possess is limited, and I do not have the right to divulge them to you. You will have to approach other Terran leaders for permission. I understand. Don't worry. My curiosity is not that deep. He began to ask a bunch of basic questions. He wanted to comprehend their diet, their learning speed, their reproductive capabilities, and more. From what he got in return, the elves differed significantly from humans in these areas. Reproduction alone was definitely a headache for the elves. Just like the former 7 apex races of the Milky Way, the elves gained a lot of inherent advantages, but paid for it by making it a lot more costly to expand their population. Perhaps the elves no longer had to expend universal life energy to convert a human soul into an elven soul, but they still had to pay the hefty material costs to conceive and grow a pre-designed designer baby. The current template of Terran elves had been designed with first-class specifications in mind. This meant that only first-raters could afford to transform into elves or produce offspring of the same race. As for second-raters and third-raters, they could forget about it unless wealthy benefactors within the Terran Alliance were willing to subsidize the process. Will there only be one variation of elf in existence? VS asked suspiciously. I cannot help but notice that the barrier to entry is much higher for the less wealthy citizens of the Terran Alliance. Second-raters and third-raters will definitely feel left out of the party. The first elf made an uneasy expression. You have touched upon an ongoing internal debate. There is indeed a discussion taking place about whether to create lesser, but more affordable variations of elves in order to open a pathway to elvenhood to the vassals of the Terran Alliance. No consensus has been formed as of yet. There are those among us who believe that elves must remain transcendent and aspirational. There are also those among us who are convinced that elvenhood must become accessible to the common man or woman. Both sides present good arguments, so we dare not make a premature decision. Chapter 74-46 End of the Banquet. Chapter 74-46 End of the Banquet. After the conclusion of the Terran event, the buzz still went on for many hours. While Gloriana and the rest of the Larkin sons boarded their shuttles and returned to their fleet, VS stayed behind for a few more hours in order to exchange information with his hosts. The Terrans provided him with additional information and assurances about their latest schemes. The Elven Initiative had already become a highly contentious issue, but it shouldn't affect the completion of the Arboreal project. Elves and Woodsap mechs may be tied together, but they are not bound to the point where one cannot survive without the other. Master Layla Rebecca DeVos told VS in private. If the heat becomes so bad that it becomes untenable to proceed with our original plans, then we will simply restrict our production to the human-compatible versions of Woodsap mechs. However, I must warn you that the Woodsap mech pilots who choose to undergo this process will end up stuck in bodies that no longer perfectly suit themselves anymore. Though the Terrans had made a strong effort into reducing the negative side effects, the humans with Woodsap flowing through their veins would never become as limber and agile as before. They lost the ability to run and sprint. The sluggishness that characterized their partially wooden bodies simply couldn't support such sharp movements. Are you saying that you prefer for every Woodsap mech pilot to become an elf? VS asked. I think that if the Woodsap mech pilots are given a choice, over 80% will choose to undergo the green rebirth ritual and be freed from their slow and clumsy human bodies. Master Layla DeVos calmly responded. Their physical impairments should not affect their piloting effectiveness, but it is still deeply uncomfortable for them to live their daily lives as monstrosities in human form. If they are told they have an opportunity to transcend their biological weaknesses and gain the body of an incredibly healthy elven body, we believe that most will accept this offer. Only those who maintain strong attachments to their human identities will be able to resist this temptation. Framing the elven transformation as a temptation made it sound rather evil. Because the Terran leadership were not stupid enough to ignore the very real possibility that introducing a second race might end up posing a serious threat to red humanity one day. That future may be a decade or a century away, But so long as the elves manage to overcome their weak early period, they may grow powerful and numerous enough to become formidable opponents if they ever turned hostile towards humans. The best way to contain this threat was to prevent the elves from propagating, but this was clearly not a viable choice. Enough Terran leaders supported the elven initiative that it would take overwhelming pushback from the grassroots in order to sway their minds. So what does this mean for the composition of Woodsap mech pilots in the detachment that will be fighting alongside my troops? To you, VS, it means that most of the Woodsap mech pilots will be elves. The final roster is still being settled, but you can expect to see no more than 30 or so human test pilots. You and your fellow Larkin sons must make an effort to get along with them. This should not be difficult as we have given them express orders to cooperate with your clan. The second elf will be leading the unit, so try to build a good rapport with him. As a descendant of the Shuku ancient elven clan, he is competent enough to assume the necessary responsibilities. VS was not too sure about that. Karakala Shuku might present a strong image, but he seemed a bit too young for his position. Then again, the same could be said for the likes of Yenya Aduk, VS, Kasela Ingvar and many other members of the younger generation. VS actually suspected that the Terrans deliberately prioritized youth over experience when they made their leadership selections. The two elven leaders were young enough to adapt to radical changes. They should also be much more susceptible to external influences, chief among them Gaia. It would be a lot more difficult to expect old geezers who have already lived for a couple centuries to convert to elvenhood and worship a deity that used to exist in myth and fantasy. Is there anything else I should know, Master? Not immediately. The second elf will brief you and the Saint Commander about the specific demands and conditions of his detachment. While he is important, he is not as critical as his female counterpart. We do not require you to protect him at all cost. Let him temper his strength and survival skills on the battlefield. If he wants to turn his nominal leadership into actual respect and authority, then he must earn his combat achievements the hard way. His soldiers will respect him otherwise. Well, I believe our forces will be able to give him enough chances to prove his valor. VS promised. What about the other elven leader? The first elf will remain behind in order to perform the Green Rebirth ritual for many other elf candidates. She is not a soldier. We are not in a rush to pair her with a Woodsap mech and deploy her in the field. She has a greater role to play. I understand. They talked a bit more before they finally separated. As VS returned to the Tarask, he almost got ready to retire for the night. The revelations shocked him at first, but now he felt a sense of dread and anticipation. He felt dread because he feared that the Elven Initiative may end up derailing the Terran Alliance and Red humanity as a whole. He also felt anticipation because he had observed enough about the elves to know that they possessed extraordinary capabilities. What would they be like once they piloted their Woodsap mechs in a serious engagement? VS had a strong feeling that these elven Woodsap mech pilots would deliver him a surprise. For now, he began to stop by his office in order to catch any messages or developments that he might have missed. Welcome back, boss. Good evening, sir. It has been a long time, VS. 3 of his trusted compatriots awaited him inside. VS nodded towards Gavin Newman and Eliza M.O. Ragadon. Both had been busy with receiving calls, sorting messages and preparing summaries for their superior. He did not expect Calabast to stop by, though. Though the two still shared a good relationship, Calabast had become way too busy with leading the intelligence apparatus of the Larkinson clan. Ever since VS resigned as the Larkinson Patriarch, Calabast generally answered to Saint Commander Kasela Ingvar. She also decided to stick to the Premier Fleet and accompany her immediate superior. It was only now that the Premier Fleet and the Blue Jay Fleet converged that Calabast had an opportunity to pay him a personal visit. VS exchanged a brief glance with the spymaster. The silent exchange did not indicate that they would be talking about anything too urgent, so he decided to listen to his other 2 subordinates first. Gavin, let's start with you. Is there anything urgent that I need to address? His personal assistant stood up and responded with a strained expression. Many of your friends, acquaintances and business partners have urgently messaged you in order to obtain clarification about your stance on elves, proposals to purchase Woodsap mechs from us and reminders that you still need to provide your input on the development of polymetal mechs, mergewater mechs and so on. Your other collaboration partners have had a strong sense of urgency ever since the Terrans have paraded their prototype Woodsap mechs. VS couldn't help but smirk after hearing that. Well, tough luck. They may have agreed to collaborate with me, but the Terrans did so first. They believed in my vision a little earlier than everyone else and invested a huge amount of their own manpower and resources into the Arboreal project. I will accompany it to completion properly before I am ready to fully commit to my other advanced projects. You can tell them that. As for people who have made other inquiries, you should be able to address them without requiring my presence. I am not their political chew toy, nor am I free to give them answers that the Terrans are much more able to provide. Gavin robotically nodded. Noted. Not many people will be pleased with that, but your status is high enough to excuse your response. Eliza. VS turned towards his chief of staff. What does the Red Collective think about the latest developments? The woman made a rueful expression. Their response is mixed, as you can imagine. The RC is anything but monolithic, so opinions are bound to be divided. There are human supremacists who feel threatened by the elves. There are also transhumanists who embrace this announcement. The more unstable among them even harbor desires to create their own subraces of elves, or even go as far to invent an entirely different race of their own. What? Eliza's expression grew severe. The floodgates have opened. Since the Terrans have chosen to violate a taboo and create a race that is distinct from humans, other groups have also stepped up and investigated whether it is viable for them to do the same. Both large and small players are seriously considering whether to abandon their human molds and transform themselves into angels. That sounded so like what plenty of humans would think of. VS feared that this may truly become an uncontrollable trend if left unchecked. I hope that the RC does whatever it takes to suppress these wild ideas. VS stated. Perhaps the Terrans may be able to pull this off correctly, but I do not trust that many others are able to do the same. If anything goes wrong, they may end up giving life to a serious competitor to red humanity. Opinions within the leadership ranks are divided on the matter. Eliza said. Although your directorship is anomalous, you are still a senior executive leader of the Red Collective. I expect that you will receive an invitation to attend a virtual conference to discuss the RC's stance on the Elven race very soon. VS actually doubted that would happen. He had forged a special understanding with the Red Collective. In exchange for supporting his leadership of the Phase Lord Department, he would refrain from meddling with the other political affairs of their superorganization. This was a deal that worked well enough for both sides, VS supposed. That did not mean he wanted to remain cut off from all of the major leadership meetings. He still needed to channel his voice every now and then in order to remind the other collies that he still existed. What have you said about my woodsap mechs? The RC as a whole does not have a strong opinion on them. The collies are not mech designers and do not have that much of an interest in mechs or Carmine mechs. They know that this falls under the jurisdiction of the Red Association for the most part. VS grunted. I see. I shouldn't be surprised. I don't want to deal too much with the elves either. Don't get me wrong. They are interesting and are strongly connected to my woodsap mechs. I just don't want to deal with the political fallout. Keep an eye on the deliberations within the upper ranks of the RC, but don't bother me with trivial information. Understood. If that is what you want, sir. After handling a few other small issues with his assistants, VS finally turned to the former Hexer and old acquaintance. Calabast, long time no see. I take it that your visit here is for a specific purpose. Do I need to send out Gavin and Eliza? The smartly dressed woman smirked before shaking her head. Gavin can stay, but it may be best to send out Eliza. I am here to address clan business. The collie among them already rose from her seat and turned towards the exit. If that is the case, then I shall go back and collect more information on what my fellow colleagues are discussing. Once she left the office, only VS, Gavin and Calabast remained. All right, we're alone, I guess. So what is so important that you need to come in person? Chapter 74-47 Terran Undercurrents. Chapter 74-47 Terran Undercurrents. The atmosphere within the office grew tense as both VS and Gavin waited for Calabast to state the reason for her personal visit. There was no way the spymaster dropped by at this particular time and place if she had to pass on mundane intelligence. Though Calabast controlled her body language and spirituality far too well to give out any clues about her true thoughts, her actions alone constituted a signal in itself. VS leaned back on his office chair and crossed his arms. He had a feeling that he may not be done with shocking revelations for the night. In case the topics of discussion veered into dangerous territory, he made sure to activate his best and most exhaustive signal jammers and other interference devices. Though he did not bother to recall Lucky in order to have him sweep his office for bugs, VS was already pretty confident in his ability to keep his talks under wraps. He directed a measured gaze at the woman who accompanied him all the way back in the Komodo Star sector. Please speak, he said with an echo of transcendent power in his voice. If there is important information that I need to know, then I would like to hear it even if you cannot back it up with solid proof. The stern-looking woman maintained a perfectly straight posture. A few seconds passed before she graced him with her insights. Let me test your understanding of the Terran Alliance. Who are its leaders? The Terran ancient clans. VS quickly responded. The Terran Alliance is a colonial offshoot of the Greater Terran United Confederation, which was explicitly set up to distribute power among a couple of dozen ancient clans. From what I learned, the idea behind this power structure is to maintain continuity of stability and leadership over the long term. It avoids the pitfalls of centralization and exists as a direct contrast to the new Rubarth Empire and the Rubarthan Pact. The spymaster did not look satisfied with his response. That is the textbook answer to my question. Your answer is adequate if you were still an ordinary mech designer or space peasant, but that is not the case anymore. Think about the changes brought about by the Age of Dawn. The old power structures have been crumbling one by one. Some of them collapsed in the first year. Others have begun to crumble on an ongoing basis. No matter the pace, all of them are on their way out. What is taking their place? This was a profound question. VS clearly could not pass her test by offering a surface reply. He needed to take his time and analyze the political landscape properly in order to comprehend her underlying point. He bent his head and frowned. Though he understood that he had advisors by his side exactly because he could borrow their wisdom, he knew that if he wanted to retain his power, he needed to be able to figure out stuff like this by himself. Fortunately, his mind was not that dull. Calabast had already given him a handful of hints. He merely had to direct his attention to the subject matter in order to connect the dots. Warlords, he recalled. The top dogs of Red humanity have been instituting policies that are gradually meant to shift power away from traditional civilian leaders in order to reward those who excel in combat against our external enemies. Such policies not only tend to favor militaristic organizations, but also individual powerhouses. Calabast smiled. Indeed, policies such as the new elites program may have slipped your attention, but it has been a game-changer for many ambitious people from all layers of society. Enough time has passed to produce results. Many states and organizations that have performed poorly on the front line have fallen from grace. Others have risen at a speed that can rival the Larkinson clan. The recently elevated Audiobook clan is a notable example. The Hex Federation's powerful militants have also grown strong enough to mount a challenge on a weakened first-rate state of the Red Ocean Union. All of this talk about ambitious leaders reminded VS of a particularly ambitious uncle. Let me guess. Saint General Ark Larkinson also desires to make a play of taking over a state. The former Hexer sighed. I did not intend to mention your foolhardy uncle, but it is true that he wishes to lead the Deviut branch into taking over an entire second-rate state, though a different one from the Colonial Federation of Deviut. That would constitute a betrayal of his oaths. His honor does not allow him to challenge his current employer and benefactor. VS chuckled at that. That sounds like Ark, all right? He may be vainglorious, but he is still an honorable soldier. Let us get back to the original topic. The reason why warlords are important is because their rise is reshaping the political landscape of the Terran Alliance. On the surface, the ancient clans remain in charge. In reality, their individual power is not great. They have begun to consolidate their power base by forming coalitions with other groups who share similar goals and ideologies. Several of them have emerged, but two are particularly relevant for this conversation. Calabast activated a projection that displayed a bunch of names and symbols. They looked messy at first, but they slowly separated into two distinct groups. The Green Coalition has only been recently formed and is already rising rapidly. Its members are the masterminds behind the creation of the Elven race. Their ultimate goals are hard to ascertain, but they are absolutely not simple. At least one of their aims is to secure the primacy of the Elven race over the Terran Alliance. VS furrowed his brows. That is way too little information. Who is part of the Green Coalition? You should already be familiar with their names. The Shuku Ancient Elven Clan, the Devas Ancient Clan, the Audiobook Clan, many Terran biotech research institutions, and more. I have yet to find to confirm the names of other Terran ancient clans, but they definitely exist. All of these names did indeed sound familiar. VS had a very strong suspicion that the Green Coalition was made up of all of the people that actively collaborated with him on the Arboreal project. If this was the case, then his Woodsap mechs had already been stamped by this political cabal. It would be difficult to disassociate his latest work with the antics of the so-called Green Coalition. Since the Green Coalition is apparently up to no good, who stands in opposition? The opposing group is currently referred to as the Steel Coalition, though it may be subject to change. Calabast answered. This is made up of the Terran clans and influential individuals who are strongly opposed to the goals and methods of the Green Coalition. They tend to be more restrained and traditional among the Terrans. While they do not inherently reject change, they have an aversion to extreme risk-taking and believe that the best way to run the Terran Alliance is to stick to their old and proven strategies. That sounded rather problematic. Though VS felt that the Green Coalition was being a bit too radical in its actions, the Steel Coalition sounded as if its members would rather stick their heads in the sand than adapt to the changing times. Who is part of the Steel Coalition? The Strion Ancient Clan, for one. There are other clans and organizations that have banded together to provide a counterweight to the Green Coalition, but you will probably have difficulty recognizing them. They are not too important as the Steel Coalition lacks a strong and unifying factor. They only exist to push back against the Elven Initiative and such. That may change in the future. I see. While VS found it rather interesting that Terran politics had developed in this direction, He did not immediately understand why it was important for Calabas to inform him about it in person. There had to be another layer that he had yet to understand. His eyes narrowed in suspicion as he quickly tried to figure out the true message that Calabas wanted to convey. He suddenly realized a missing aspect. Wait, these names sound fairly impressive, but they do not sound powerful enough to lead the coalitions outright. They can easily fall apart if they aren't being wrangled by an overarching authority. The only ones in the Terran Alliance that can force these arrogant ancient clans to obey are Tier 1 galactic citizens. The spymaster curled her lips in a smile. Exactly. You certainly took your time to figure out this truth. Although the Terrans have made a concerted effort to keep their dirty laundry outside of the public sphere, my men and I have still managed to tip the veil. If our theories are correct, the two star designers of the Terran Alliance have begun to engage in power plays. VS quickly recalled the star designers on the Terran side. The Grand Mender was a female star designer who was famous for developing support and repair systems, among other innovations. The Armsforger was a male star designer who was renowned throughout both galaxies for developing the most exquisite melee weapons for high-end mechs. The two may be Terran in origin, but they possessed very different specializations and interests. They did not have all that much in common. It sounded rather plausible that their political interests diverged as well. Wait a second, Calabas. The Grand Mender may have been the mastermind behind the creation of the Elven race, but I find it hard to believe that she would step so far outside of her core specializations. From what I know, she has never dabbled all that much in biotech and biomech design. Her works are all related to improving metallic mechs and devices. She has always been known as a strong inventor of conventional tech. That is true, she responded. You probably know more about the nature of star designer than myself, but is it not conceivable that one such as the Grand Mender has decided to branch out? She is clearly more than intelligent enough to acquire new skills and develop new specializations. The Age of Dawn has been a turning point for many individuals. Even star designers can choose to change their direction. Perhaps the Grand Mender had an epiphany. Perhaps she has decided to unleash her ambitions after casting aside the yoke of the Meshers and the Fleeters. Perhaps she has entered into a deeper partnership with Gaia. Whatever the case, she is the driving force behind the rise of the elves. I see. Then the Armsforger is probably the highest patron of the Steel Coalition, am I correct? Calabas nodded. That is so. Compared to the Grand Mender, he is apparently not that eager to destabilize the Terran Alliance by adopting too many radical changes. He is an advocate for incremental improvement. He cares much more about preserving the original Terran identity than his female colleague. Currently, that means that he is becoming increasingly more active in opposing the Elven initiative. That sounded clear enough. There was only one more issue. There is still a third Tier 1 galactic citizen from the Terran Alliance. VS mentioned. What is the stance of the Light of Soul? I do not know. Calabas honestly replied. Many Terrans are also in the dark. We have tried our best to find out more, but so far many of our sources believe that the Light of Soul is either withholding his true opinions or has decided to maintain a strict stance of neutrality. This makes sense as he wields a great amount of power and influence. Out of a sense of responsibility for his people, he may be reluctant to voice his opinion until enough time has passed for every stakeholder to exchange their opinions and take their actions. If the Light of Soul felt strongly about this issue, then he would have made his stance clear at an early stage. Since that was not the case, then he may be positioning himself as a neutral arbiter who would support the coalition that had managed to gain the upper hand. The question now was whether the Terran God pilot truly held a neutral stance. Chapter 74-48, Desperate Pushback. Chapter 74-48, Desperate Pushback. VS sighed and scratched the side of his head. Calabas sure made his life more complicated. Her information always turned a clear lake into a turbid cesspool. His impression of the Terran Alliance had dropped. He previously thought that no matter how divided the Terran ancient clans may be, they maintained enough harmony to have the situation well in hand. Now, that may no longer be the case as the Terran star designers developed greater ambitions. They no longer remained satisfied with their positions as the patrons and elders of their people and nation. They sought to secure real power, wealth and influence by controlling the levers of power of the Terran Alliance. It did not matter if they chose a different direction from the infamous Polymath, who directly took over Bridgehead 1 and crowned herself as the Cybernetic Empress. The Grand Mender and the Armsforger evidently decided to play a more civilized game. To star designers like them, it did not matter too much if they held all of the power in the open. They could still enjoy many of the benefits that mattered if they exerted their control through proxies. Doing so would allow them to avoid the backlash suffered by the Polymath. They would also be able to maintain the support and approval of the supporting Terran clans, whose influence and foundations still remained formidable for the most part. VS had been blind to all of this, but now that Calabas had revealed this game, it seemed so obvious to him now. He couldn't believe that he had been so blind to miss all of the signs. So the Grand Mender and the Armsforger are secretly fighting for control over the Terran Alliance. VS uttered. That doesn't sound very fun. I would have thought that it was best for them to form a united front in order to prop up their colonial star empire during these trying times. Star designers have strong visions on how the future should be, Calabas stated. Do not misunderstand this conflict. My impression is that they have not fallen out entirely. The two are anything but archenemies. Perhaps it is better to characterize them as rivals, similar to how Saint Commander Casella Ingvar is competing against Saint General Ark Larkinson for leadership in the clan. When they are confronting external parties, the two Terran star designers will present a united front. It is only when they are vying for power within the Terran Alliance that they have become opponents. This did not sound particularly strange. VS was familiar with the setup. The temptation was great for one party to cheat and rely on outside help in order to gain an advantage, but that same party might end up suffering an enormous backlash if revealed. VS suddenly understood the awkward position that the Light of Soul had found himself in. He was probably not in bed with either star designer, but could not abstain his vote forever due to his identity as a Terran. I have a feeling that the Light of Soul is not entirely neutral on this issue. He voiced his opinion. I am not quite sure where he stands, though. In some ways, he is the archetypical stuffy straight-back Terran who greatly respects the old traditions. In other ways, he is known for pushing boundaries. His god mech wouldn't have become the fastest among its kind if he rigidly stuck to the rules all of the time. He exemplifies the contradiction inherent among modern Terrans. He maintains a hazy balance between respecting the old while embracing the new. Calabas smiled in amusement. That is a good assessment of his public deeds and words. Whether he truly fits your description is another matter. In any case, we do not have enough intelligence at our disposal that can reveal his inclinations. Some of my analysts believe he is backing the Steel Coalition. They believe that the Light of Soul is too concerned about the stability of the Terran Alliance to allow the elves to go too far. What do you think, Calabas? VS pointedly asked. I have a feeling that you are not taking this side. You guessed correctly. Bravo. I indeed disagree with this analysis. My guess is that the Light of Soul is at least somewhat supportive of the Green Coalition. Reason. The woman spread her arms. For one, the Light of Soul spends the most time at the front lines of any Terran soldier. He has witnessed a large amount of death and slaughter, much of which he is responsible for. Such experiences can change a person, even if he is a human god. I believe, though not without proof, that such a god pilot who has assumed the mantle of guardian over the Terran Alliance is desperate for change. The Steel Coalition believes that the Terrans can achieve victory by staying true to their old ideals. That may not be enough anymore. The Green Coalition risks going too far, but at least its members are being proactive about achieving a decisive victory. The Green Belt is the first real plan that the Terrans have come up with that has a realistic possibility of realizing this outcome. Though her arguments consisted of speculation, Calabas was one of the best people readers that VS knew of. If she believed that the Light of Soul had been thinking in this direction, then there was a decent chance that was right. Of course, who knew what god pilots actually thought? They had become so far removed from their mortal thinking patterns that it would folly for anyone to make a 100% prediction. The logic still held up, though. VS did not think that the Light of Soul was irrational enough to deliberately make life harder for himself. There is another clue that fits in this story. The spymaster continued. I have learned that the Strions are just about to embark on a risky operation with the help of the Cybernetic Empire's so-called Greater Translocation Gate. It is considerably risky for the famous Renewer of Terra and a large proportion of his elite forces to be the first to commence a deep strike operation. This is especially the case when the Polymath and her subjects have just upgraded the aforementioned gate with superdimensional matter. The Strions should have waited until the Cybers had concluded their tests. The fact that they are not willing to wait for this prudent step indicates that they are driven by urgency. VS rubbed his hairless chin in thought. According to you, the Strions have sided with the Steel Coalition. General Axlar Strion hopes to find a breakthrough opportunity by venturing deep into enemy space. If he succeeds, then he can become the second god pilot of the Terran Alliance. He will gain so much power and influence that he can not only give the Steel Coalition a powerful voice, but also take over as its leader if he wishes. Oh, he will make a try for leadership, that is for certain, Calabas said. He is a crusader. While he is likely opposed to the Elven Initiative, he has plenty of reforms in mind that are not as extreme. Star designers could never win a popularity contest against god pilots in general. There were exceptions, of course, but that did not apply to the Armsforger. His Excellency Lucas Nailed possessed a lot of prestige in the mech industry and the greater mech community, but possessed much less relevance outside of these spheres. God pilots did not have this problem. They always enjoyed a great amount of publicity, and their deeds were much more visually impressive. This meant that if the Renewer of Terra truly ascended to godhood, he had a very realistic chance to become the foremost authority of the Terran Alliance. Of course, there was still his predecessor. I think I know what you mean, VS said in thought. General Axlar Strian is desperate to become a god pilot because he fears that if he does not gain enough power, the Terran Alliance may potentially deteriorate before his eyes. If the Light of Soul is already leaning towards the Green Coalition, then the elves will gain dominance in the upper echelons. If the Strians want to stop this from happening, they need to produce a god pilot before the fastest god pilot has decided to voice his support. Correct. This is why I believe that the Terrans on every side have decided to hold their breaths until the outcome of the Strian Ancient Clan's expedition is known. Success will boost the influence of the Steel Coalition. Failure will pave the way for the Green Coalition eventual dominance. VS felt the onset of another headache. He had no idea that this Terran game ran this deep. What a mess, he muttered. The worst part about it all is that I am tied to both coalitions. On the one hand, I maintain good relations with General Axlar Strian and the Strian Ancient Clan. On the other hand, I have cooperated closely with pretty much every member of the Green Coalition to get the Arboreal project off the ground. I don't want to displease the friends I have made on either side of this political divide. Calabast gave him an encouraging look. If your goal is to avoid getting caught up in this whirlpool, then I advise you to not get involved any more than you have to. That is it. You have already been warned not to wade into this Terran mudpool. For once in your life you should do what you are told like a good boy. You are a Terran and neither is the Larkinson clan. We should remember our identity as a foreign party and maintain an appropriate distance from Terran internal affairs. It will simply be harder for you to do so given your enormous role in the development of Woodsap Mechs and your ongoing relations with the Strians. It may be a good idea for you and the forces of the Larkinson clan to vacate this side of human-occupied space once we have concluded your Nemesis campaign. That sounded like a good idea to VS. He had already spent plenty of time among the Terrans. Once he completed the Arboreal project in full, there should be no more compelling reasons for him to stick around. It would actually be better if he relocated to the other parts of human-occupied space in order to cooperate more effectively with his other collaboration partners. VS had a strong desire to work on polymetal mechs next, which meant that he needed to return to the Red Ocean Union and work together with the Meshers for a couple of months. Fortunately, the development of the Arboreal project already taught him a lot of lessons about developing a more advanced version of the Carmine system. Although polymetal mechs used a very different substance than Woodsap as the binding medium, many design solutions still remained universal or easily adaptable. This should cut back on the time he needed to develop a working and stable version of the polymetal system. Thank you for advice, Calabast. You misunderstand me, VS. You heard a solution. It is not my preferred one. What? I only told you to evade this issue if you want to avoid the consequences of getting it wrong. She began to smirk. However, if you play your cards correctly, you stand a chance to become a potential kingmaker of the Terran Alliance. You will not only be able to earn a massive amount of influence, but also gain a solid foundation among the Terrans. Wealth, territory, and influence will be at your fingertips. Before you dismiss the benefits, think of how many advantages you enjoyed when you collaborated with the Terrans on the Arboreal project. How much are you willing to bet if you can potentially enjoy this level of R&D support on a permanent basis? You will no longer be dependent on the limited capabilities of your clan, which has struggled to keep up with your pace of development. She had raised a very good point. Chapter 74-49 Hedging Strategy. Chapter 74-49 Hedging Strategy. What? VS looked scandalized. I am not going to take up your suggestions. Before Calabast provided him with her recommendations, she strongly advised him to send out Eliza Mo Ragadon. He exchanged a look with his subordinate from the Red Collective. I am not too sure about this, he said. I could use a second perspective. While I haven't known her for as long as I have liked, I think I am a good enough judge of character to trust in her discretion. If I want her to represent my interests for years on end, then I have to bring her into my inner circle sooner or later. I might as well do the former. Calabast paused for a moment but did not repeat her statement. She simply shrugged as if making it clear that any leaks would be his fault. Very well then, let me give you a pair of proposals. They may sound unpleasant, but they are undeniably effective if you want to gain real power in the Terran Alliance. Her proposals ended up so extreme that VS could not imagine that he would ever seriously agree to them. They sounded so offensive to him that he found it outrageous that Calabast chose to bring them forth in the first place. Outrageous. You are essentially telling me that I should pick a side by sabotaging the other side. That goes way too far. I will never sabotage General Axlar Strian's chances of breaking through by tampering with his Ouroboros. Not that I will be able to do that in the first place. It is ridiculous for you to think that I can alter the Ouroboros from an enormous distance. As for your second idea of siding with the Steel Coalition by deliberately weakening or outright sabotaging the Woodsap mechs adapted to Elven pilots, that is even more heinous. My principles as a mech designer will never allow me to undertake such an action. Every mech pilot deserves to make use of the best work that I can reasonably supply. Practicality is a valid reason to lower the performance of a product. Selfish and political motives are not valid reasons. VS could understand the logic behind the Spymaster's devious plots, but that did not mean he could imagine himself pulling them off. He might not be the most principled leader, but he never compromised on them when it came to his primary profession. He would instantly lose much of his pride and sense of duty as a mech designer if he started to taint his own works in order to advance other goals. He directed a very sharp look at the intelligence director. VS suspected that she hadn't been serious about the pair of proposals in the first place. She knew him far too well to know what definitely wouldn't work. It seemed as if Calabast deliberately engineered this situation in order to make him more open-minded towards less extreme proposals. His gaze told her that he was on to her game and was not amused by it in the slightest. The risks are disproportionate to the rewards. Eliza offered her own opinion. The probability of getting caught is too great. The Terrans are too competent. If they manage to find proof that you are involved with pulling one of them down, then their trust in you will collapse overnight. You will not make enemies out of the coalition that you have scorned, but you will never be able to retain the trust of the coalition that you have sided with. No matter what, both sides consist of Terrans who are loyal to their colonial star empire. They are not truly enemies with each other. If you insist on entering their game, then it would be wise to play within the boundaries that they have set. That is sound advice, Eliza. VS appreciated her input. What would you do instead? His chief of staff looked pensive for a moment. It might not be polite, but I would attempt to make use of your current influence within the Red Collective to tilt the balance in the favor of your chosen side. The RC as a whole is divided on this matter, but that does not stop you from changing that. You have numerous friends and allies within our superorganization. If you can rally them and form a united power bloc, thereby acquiring enough power to draw on the resources of the Terran Alliance, but maintain enough distance to avoid getting caught up in its troubles. Calabast shook her head in disapproval. That does not go far enough. A web of alliances and influences is decent, but it is based on a shaky foundation. As long as the Larkinson clan is not considered Terran, we will always be outsiders to them. They will never give us too much real power. They are too intelligent and farsighted enough to spot the potential traps. No, if you want to take greater advantage of the Terran Alliance, you will need to commit yourself one way or another. And how do we do that without giving up our independence? VS asked. The intelligence director smirked. I think you will like my less extreme proposals. My general advice is to hedge your bets. Why invest in a single side when you can invest in both at the same time? This way, no matter which coalition has managed to gain the upper hand, you will be able to earn the corresponding benefits. VS grimaced when he heard that. Hedging is little different from staying neutral. The Terrans will definitely figure out what we are doing. I do not think that they will like our clan very much if we are attempting to exploit both sides at once. This is why you need to approach this in a certain way, VS. You are a mech designer, are you not? As a recently promoted first-class mech designer who is on the cusp of completing the massive arboreal project, you have become one of the few mech designers who can compete fairly against the Terrans in their own mech market. This is a privilege that relatively few foreigners possess. You should take advantage of this condition to strategically develop a handful of mechs that can encourage the Terrans into a path of your choosing. That actually sounded a lot more acceptable than her previous proposals. Unlike the last two ones, her current plan actually played into V's obligations as a mech designer. Tell me more. Be specific, Calabast. While I cannot call myself a mech designer, I believe it is not difficult for you to imagine new mech models that can help the Terrans fight or counter specific opponents. For example, you can earn a large amount of goodwill from the Steel Coalition by designing a conventional mech that can counter the products of the Arboreal Project. VS blinked at that. Design a counter to my own work? This early? That sounds crazy. Do you know that? I cannot deny that my Woodsap mechs possess distinctive strengths and weaknesses, but it is up to our adversaries to figure out how to exploit the latter. It is stupid and counterproductive for us to do this work only for the aliens to swoop in and steal the information. This had happened not once, not twice, but many times throughout human history. Scientists and mech designers could potentially become their own worst enemies because of their inability to resist developing a counter of their own protectors. Do not be so quick to dismiss my idea, Calabast said as she crossed her arms again. The demand is there. You can choose to give these customers what they want or allow others to make their own attempts. Unless the star designers decide to intervene directly, the works of other mech designers will inevitably be partially effective. You, on the other hand, can use your first-hand knowledge on Woodsap mechs to design cost-effective counters. Why the hell would I do that? Doing this will fulfill multiple objectives. First, you fulfill the demand of Terrans and foreigners who are desperate to field an efficient counterweight to your WhatsApp mechs. Second, you will accelerate the development of your new subcategory of Carmine mechs. I believe that as a mech designer, you do not think a mech that remains unopposed for many years is the best product. Lack of competitive pressure can easily lead to stagnation. If you want to speed up the subsequent growth and evolution of your WhatsApp mechs, you need to give yourself and the developers of the Green Coalition enough pressure to innovate further. She had crafted her argument well. Calabased under his philosophy precisely enough to tailor an argument that played to his sensibilities. VS indeed believed that competitive pressure was necessary to draw out the best in people and products. He had witnessed far too many instances where lack of threats and competition had led to stagnant growth. However, that did not mean the opposite was necessarily the right answer. Excessive pressure and competition could outright break people and objects. If VS followed Calabast's plan, then he would have to be careful about designing a counter. It had to be effective enough to pose a credible threat to WhatsApp mechs, but also withhold just enough to prevent a situation from spiraling out of control. He needed to be very clever about this because it would be far too easy to go too far in one direction or another. Though VS still wanted to grant his WhatsApp mechs a lengthy grace period, he also believed that they needed to face enough pressure to incentivize the Terrans to improve their core technologies. His understanding of the Terrans suggested to him that they would definitely slack off and rest on their laurels as soon as they handled the immediate crisis. If he wanted the subsequent development of his WhatsApp mechs to remain active and dynamic, then it was not entirely a bad idea for him to design a counter instead of letting other colleagues work haphazardly. It will be difficult to squeeze enough time for this project, VS said in a much more serious voice than before. However, as long as its sole purpose is to function as a counter, then it shouldn't require as much as the Arboreal project. Shall take this proposal under advisement. What about the other side of your hedging strategy? How can I placate the Green Coalition if I hand over an effective counter to the Steel Coalition? Calabast smirked wider as the conversation increasingly fell into her rhythm. That is simple, dear VS. You have multiple options available to you. Perhaps the option that may delight you the most is to design a new WhatsApp mech that is especially configured to synergize with elves. I believe that the elven race may already do well with the mechs of the Arboreal project, but it is clear that you have never started it with this goal in mind. If you take the time and effort to design a proper biomech optimized for elves from the start, the results will definitely outperform your earlier works. While this new elven WhatsApp mech design will not hold any appeal to the human supremacists among the Terrans, your actual target audience will be delighted. VS again found himself impressed by how clever and devious Calabast could be. The former Hexer pointed out that designing a mech that was specifically meant to be used by elves as opposed to humans would definitely make one of the most powerful and influential groups within the Green Coalition happy. So long as the elves became delighted by his targeted work, they would definitely be willing to maintain a closer bond with him, even if he cooperated with their opponents. All in all, VS did not have much objection to pulling off both proposals at the same time. If he did so correctly, then he could minimize the probability that either side would punish him heavily for his double dealing. Chapter 74 50 Countering WhatsApp Mechs. Chapter 74 50 Countering WhatsApp Mechs. VS normally did not like to put down his roots in any fixed location. He also did not wish to break any boundaries and meddle into the affairs of other parties. Yet Calabast presented him with opportunities that sounded so compelling that he felt tempted to intervene anyway. The proper way to deal with the internal conflict brewing within the Terran Alliance would be to maintain a healthy distance. Yet that seemed like a cowardly and overly risk-averse course of action. That did not mean it was the wrong decision to make, but if VS wanted to advance his interests and lay claim to a greater share of resources, R&D assistance and industrial capacity, meddling into the affairs of the Terrans sounded like a rewarding if risky venture. The key was to strike a balance between risk and reward. If he attempted to grab too much, then he would likely overreach and end up in a worse position than before. Fortunately, Calabast presented a plan that leveraged several of his accumulated advantages. From his well-earned reputation for being trustworthy to his prior record of respecting the agency and principles of his allies, VS had purposefully built an image of a reliable business partner. Few people would expect that he would scheme to seize power over another sovereign nation. Of course, this was a bit of an exaggerated description. VS had no interest in taking over planets or territory. He merely wanted to continue to exploit a significant fraction of the Terran Alliance's highly developed R&D sector. VS had witnessed firsthand how he effectively managed to get 50 times more work done with an abundance of external design and research assistance. If he had to design his WhatsApp mechs by himself, he could work non-stop for a whole decade and still not be able to complete a work as good as his present gains. Though VS did not want to develop a dependence on the Terrans, if he had an opportunity to get their help in exchange for relatively minor concessions, then he would be a fool to miss this opportunity. Please explain your plan in full. he requested. I have yet to devise a full step-by-step plan, but I can present my outline of one to you, the confident woman responded. Manipulating the Terran Alliance requires a deft touch. You will need to continue to present the image of a proud mech designer in the public sphere. Even if everyone knows you are far more than that, doing this will lower the guard of most Terrans. The Green Coalition is in the ascendancy at the moment. You have already satisfied them enough for the time being, so it is better to prioritize the needs of the Steel Coalition next. You can do that by designing a mech that just so happens to counter your WhatsApp mechs. You will need to complete it within a year at the very least in order to achieve the maximum impact. 1141. I have yet to devise a full step-by-step plan, but I can present my outline of one to you, the confident woman responded. Manipulating the Terran Alliance requires a deft touch. You will need to continue to present the image of a proud mech designer in the public sphere. Even if everyone knows you are far more than that, doing this will lower the guard of most Terrans. The Green Coalition is in the ascendancy at the moment. You have already satisfied them enough for the time being, so it is better to prioritize the needs of the Steel Coalition next. You can do that by designing a mech that just so happens to counter your WhatsApp mechs. You will need to complete it within a year at the very least in order to achieve the maximum impact. As VS studied the outline with an interested expression, his chief of staff provided her own advice. Designing a fire-based mech for the so-called Steel Coalition is too blatant of a move, Eliza M.O. Ragadon said from the side. Also, you are already short on time, VS. While I am not too familiar with your workload, I know that it is difficult if not impossible to add one more design project to your existing schedule. There should be a way to satisfy this requirement without delaying your existing projects or compromising their quality. VS looked interested. What is your suggestion, then? Eliza raised her palm and activated a familiar-looking projection. It depicted the 5 classical elements. Sir, you are currently treating your elemental carmine mechs as self-contained products. WhatsApp mechs are WhatsApp mechs. Polymetal mechs are polymetal mechs. That is understandable, but from the perspective of the Red Collective, they are not isolated from each other. Since each of them are based on what some describe as the 5 phases, then your products will definitely share the same meanings and associations. VS widened his eyes in realization. She was right. She had pointed out a blind spot that VS had overlooked due to his fixation on the mech side of the equation. I see what you mean now, he said as he began to breathe faster. I completely missed this dynamic, but now that you have pointed out, it is so obvious to me now. Every elemental carmine mech that is based on the 5 classical elements have intricate relationships with each other. There was a lot of esoteric theory behind it all. VS was fairly familiar with it, but he hadn't dived too deeply into all of the complicated relationships. However, all of it would become incredibly relevant in the future. This was because these elemental relationships determined which elemental carmine mechs fared better against other elemental carmine mechs. According to theory, metal chops wood. VS thoughtfully said. This happens to work out nicely for me. I already intended to prioritize the development of polymetal mechs after completing the Arboreal project. The Red Association was one of my earlier backers, after all, and I am still relying heavily on the meshers for protection and conveniences. It would not do to leave them waiting for so long, especially now that I have tentatively proven the strength of my elemental carmine mech concept. Eliza did not entirely agree with his statement. There is an enormous depth behind the study of the 5 phases. What you have described may be true, but it is not an absolute rule. A weak sword will break before a strong wooden trunk. However, if your polymetal mechs are roughly equal in strength to your WhatsApp mechs, then the former should enjoy a natural advantage due to their elemental relationships. What about fire? Calabast suggested. I am not a scholar in this field, but it seems to me that fire is a great way to turn WhatsApp mechs into pyres. Wood generates fire, just as spring transitions into summer. Eliza responded. Under certain circumstances, it is possible to deplete the former with the latter by using this relationship. However, I believe that relying on the power of metal is a more reliable approach. VS already began to imagine a suitable machine. We can potentially use the power of both metal and fire in the same polymetal mech. After all, the point of the latter is that its structure is incredibly malleable and flexible due to being made out of smart metal. Polymetal mechs might not be as solid as mechs made out of solid parts, but they are much more able to alter their structure and form specialized parts on the fly. It should be easy to program a set of energy weapons that rely heavily on the power of the fire element. This way, my polymetal mechs can burn WhatsApp mechs from a distance with the help of energy weapons or cut them in half with sharp metal blades up close. This idea sounded a lot more viable than designing a brand new first-class mech that was solely designed to counter his WhatsApp mechs. This idea may work, actually. Calabast already made her deductions in her mind. The downside is that you have already signed an agreement with the Red Association that grants them exclusivity to your polymetal mechs. However, this is politically convenient for you as this work should not be considered a blatant attempt to meddle into internal Terran politics. You can maintain your facade of neutrality much easier. After all, it is not your fault that the wood element is supposedly weak against attacks from the metal element. This is a fundamental rule. She was right about that. Perhaps the Terrans had already thought about it and taken the appropriate countermeasures. It makes more sense why the two coalitions are named in this particular way. Eliza voiced her thoughts. The Green Coalition is heavily invested in works based on the wood element. The Steel Coalition, on the other hand, has a strong interest in the metal element. This signals to me that the latter wants to keep the former in check. It is evident that there are many Terrans who fear that the elves and their green agenda may go out of control. VS nodded in agreement. That did make a lot of sense now that he understood the greater context. You two have given me a lot of food for thought. Eventually, I will complete an elemental carmine mech for each of the 5 elements. They will all have different restraining and synergistic relationships with each other. They may even develop brand new synergies through specialized teamwork. Unfortunately for their owners, since they are all bound to become exclusive toys to 5 different players, there will not be many instances of such teamwork. The only group that has the right to field all 5 elemental carmine mechs in the same force is us. Calabast grinned wider. That is one of the key concessions that you have secured with your respective partners. You never let go of your works if you can help it. We are the only organization that can legally field woodsap mechs alongside polymetal mechs, bloodfire mechs, and etc. This means that we are the only ones that can produce synergies that can elevate their performance by 50%, 100% or higher. Those numbers might sound exaggerated, but that was how the 5 classical elements worked. VS could easily see this happening in reality. The only issue was that the Larkinson clan was still at least several years away from realizing these amazing synergies. He had only just reached the final phases of the Arboreal project. He still needed to invest a lot of time in completing the 4 remaining elemental carmine projects. If there aren't any major distractions in the near future, then I am confident that I can design both a polymetal mech and a bloodfire mech within 1.5 years at most, he said. The latter is a bit complicated because my wife and I are already in the process of developing a very high-end version of one in the form of the Promethea Mark II project. Depending on how much extra design and R&D assistance I can secure, I may be able to complete both projects faster, especially if there is a great amount of commonality with the woodsap mechs of the Arboreal project. The faster he completed these projects, the better. Once he managed to publish 3 elemental carmine mech designs, he would definitely be able to prove the superiority of this category of mechs. With so many powerful carmine mechs showcasing their strength on the front lines, VS should be able to negotiate better conditions with the remaining 2 partners. Calabast had begun to adjust her outline based on new input. If it turns out that your polymetal mech and possibly your bloodfire mech can consistently demolish a woodsap mech under equal conditions, then the Steel Coalition will definitely rise in power. This is especially the case if you publish those 2 specific elemental carmine mechs right after you have completed your current project. If you want to complete your hedging strategy, then you need to prop up the Green Coalition by developing a woodsap mech that is strong enough to hold its own against those aforementioned machines. VS felt troubled by this suggestion. That is easier said than done. That is like telling me to design a turtle that can fly faster than a bird. It is easier to follow the relationships of the 5 classical elements than to go against them. I may need to put in 5 times as much effort just to develop a woodsap mech that can barely break even. Does that not sound more interesting to you, VS? Calabast smiled back. Every mech designer can design an easy mech. Only a handful can complete a counterintuitive design. Consider it a challenge. Only a true master can defy the rules. Chapter 7451 Preparing for the Worst. Chapter 7451 Preparing for the Worst. When she put it that way, VS could not easily back away from this challenge. He already had a history of defying conventional wisdom and realizing the impossible. That said, he did not direct much attention to this line of thinking. He still needed to complete other mech design projects before he could think about developing an elven woodsap mech that could resist its own counters. The clandestine meeting soon came to an end. Calabast possessed a wellspring's worth of intelligence, but much of it was either unverified or trivial. VS did not need to know everything, especially now that Casella assumed leadership over the Larkinson clan. The older he became, the more he came to appreciate the ability to delegate work to the people led and befriended over the span of many years. He trusted the ace commander to act appropriately on the intelligence collected by the Black Cats. Before she left, Calabast left another warning behind. Do not underestimate the native aliens. The enemy cannon fodder that have been battering our front lines are not representative of their true strength. Their core defenders exist on another level. Many major alien races have truly woken up at this point. While they have been sending their old and haphazardly upgraded warships out to die, they have also utilized their enormous industrial capacity to construct entirely new lines of modern phase fighters and warships. Their shipbuilders have incorporated many human-derived advancements into their hulls. Hyper-technology and e-technology are no longer foreign to them. While their scientists are not as innovative as ours, their numbers are thousands if not millions times greater than ours. Their adaptation speed is uncommonly fast, especially because of the guidance provided by the cosmopolitans. I am already aware of that, Calabast. Do you have anything more specific to tell me about the threat we are about to confront? VS asked with an annoyed expression. In fact, I do, VS. As you know, the native aliens are badly getting mauled by the mutated Vorabugs. For whatever reason, the Red Cabal has decided that they need to break the spine of red humanity first, so the major alien races have mobilized their elite warfleets to the Terran front. From the perspective of the alien leaders, instead of letting their best and brightest get consumed by an unending tide of cheaply produced space insects, it is better to utilize their potent strength to achieve an ultimate breakthrough. Once they have breached the Terran lines, they hope to trigger a chain reaction that will ultimately drive red humanity back to Bridgehead 1. That sounds like wishful thinking. VS looked skeptical. Many of those elite forces will get wiped out by the light of Sol. Even if the native aliens manage to overwhelm the Terran defenders despite all of their losses, the Red Ocean Union won't stand by. There are still several more god pilots that can reinforce this flank, and there are also the war planets from the Cybernetic Empire to consider. Calabast raised a finger. But I have yet to mention the best part. There are signs that the Red Cabal is finally prepared to deploy a greater proportion of their native gods to the front lines. Not only will greater phase lords and phase whales become more prevalent, but their leaders may show up as well. You should understand that our entire task force has no chance of defeating a single ancient phase whale. That caused VS to grimace. She was unfortunately correct in that. Ancient phase whales not possess bodies at least as large as moons, but also possessed a large collection of powerful and highly developed phase water organs. Even if they still possessed shortcomings in comparison to god pilots, that did not provide any relief to forces that lacked the protection of the latter. An ancient phase whale possessed the ability to rapidly traverse across space. The true god-level creature could also instantly teleport from one side of a star system to another, or completely trap an entire human fleet in an invisible space cage. In short, if the combined fleet of Larkin Suns and other forces encountered a single ancient phase whale, neither escape nor victory was possible. Though VS definitely had to take this threat seriously, he did not let this deter him either. We have taken this potential threat into consideration, he said. While it is true that we may not be able to survive a direct encounter against an ancient phase whale, we just have to work really hard to avoid one in the first place. Much of our preparations entail the seeding of scout vessels and listening devices. The Terrans also have a vested interest in assisting our cause. Calabast maintained a wary expression. Gathering intelligence in alien-occupied space is another whole other game compared to observations within human-occupied space. It is much more difficult to obtain a complete picture in territories where the mere presence of humans or human devices invites immediate retaliation. Ancient phase whales are also difficult to track if they have put down their egos. If they are clever enough to leave their massive honor guards behind and utilize their exquisite mastery over spatial manipulation to obscure their tracks, they can sneak closer to the front lines without alarming anyone aside from the occasional peers they encounter along the way. Ancient phase whales could be really sneaky if they wanted to. They possessed many different spatial abilities that could help them prevent detection. This was one of the main reasons why they consistently managed to infiltrate deep into human-occupied space and put a strategically important central star node such as Bridgehead 1 inside a greater space-time bubble. We have taken this possibility into consideration, VS said. I cannot say anything about it due to confidentiality reasons. Just know that if we truly have the misfortune of bumping into a native god that our champions cannot handle, we can still answer with a trump card of our own. The cost of employing this solution is very high, though. It is better if we do not have to resort to such a measure. Just know that without this final guarantee, I would never agree to greenlight the Nemesis campaign so easily. He truly wanted to inform more people about this contingency plan, but it was of utmost importance that none of the details leaked to the wrong parties. VS could only keep his mouth shut and hope that the situation would not deteriorate to this point. Once Calabast and Eliza bid him good night, he stayed behind for half an hour and finally decided to retire for the night. Much had happened and he needed to enjoy a proper rest in order to regain a fresh perspective. As usual, his wife had already slipped into their shared bed first. When VS laid down, she turned around and stared into his eyes with a judging expression. "What is it, honey?" he wearily asked. "I can recognize that look of yours. That face tells me that you have put even more burdens onto your shoulders. I can feel that you have become more restless than a few hours ago. What happened?" He sighed. "Let's just say that I have become more exposed to the truth. Knowing too much can be a burden as well as a blessing. People at my level constantly have to worry about the bigger picture. What I find troubling is that the more we engage in galactic-level affairs, the less attention we can spare to the smaller things in life. A part of me regrets that I have become too high-profile too quickly. I am increasingly more convinced that it is not wise for anyone below the age of 100 to become a Tier 2 galactic citizen. His wife softened her expression somewhat. She gently reached out and brushed her slender palm against his cheek. Do not regret your successes. You are absolutely qualified to assume all of those responsibilities. You should not compare yourself to your lessers. I did not go out of my way to break the Woden dynasty's traditions and expectations just to marry an inferior boy. I may not agree with every decision you have made, but you have managed to blaze your trail anyway. I trust you, VS, and I do not do so lightly. Have confidence in yourself. Though VS frequently doubted Gloriana's judgment, he still felt flattered by her unreserved trust. He knew very well that he had made many questionable decisions over the years that had stretched her patience. She would have never tolerated him if she had not shed much of the behavior imparted by her Hexer upbringing. Tomorrow is the big day, he told her. That is the final time you can choose whether to stay behind with our children. Are you still set on your previous decision? His wife actually adopted a hesitant expression, which VS found odd. The dangers of embarking on the Nemesis campaign was still very great despite all of the preparations he and his allies had made. No plans survived contact with the enemy. Unforeseen situations could always arrive, and even the best countermeasures could fail during critical moments. The only way to guarantee 100% survival was to get escorted by a god pilot, but no matter how important VS may be, he did not warrant such excessive treatment. The Light of Soul was the only real backbone of the Terran defensive lines. He could not move away for a single day, or else the flood of alien attackers would overwhelm the partially depleted Terran line fighters in fairly quick order. It would have been a lot better if the Terran Alliance had 2 god pilots at its disposal, but reality was not so kind. I think I would still like to accompany you, she said. I cannot bear to separate with our youngest son and daughter, so you will get to enjoy their company as well. VS frowned. I am not sure whether that is a wise decision, dear. It would greatly reassure me if you, Andraste and Marvin return to our old haunt New Constantinople 8 and wait for my return. No. Gloriana sounded uncommonly firm this time. I have faith in you and our forces. More Larkin Sun Saints have rallied to us than ever before. The Terrans and the Red 3 are all backing us in different ways. This is not a suicide run in my opinion. All of us are living in a dangerous age. If we do not have the courage to brave the dangers of the present, we will fare worse against future threats. This applies to us as well as our children. I believe that Andraste and Marvin will be able to learn valuable lessons in the next few months that they can never acquire in friendly space. Is this not what the Larkin Sun clan is all about? She made a point that VS could not easily refute. He had always been an advocate of learning through adversity. That said, there had to be a limit to how much he could afford to endanger his wife and children, especially when they had little to contribute. Our children. Aurelia has remained behind. She has just begun to study how to operate a warship in one of the safest Central Star nodes in the New Frontier. That is enough in my opinion. Gloriana reminded him. She is our heir. If anything regrettable happens to us, then a part of me will be reassured that our bloodline will continue. My hand-picked agents from the Larkin Sun clan and the Woden dynasty will accompany her and manage her inheritance in our stead. My brother Brutus has personally promised me that he will dedicate his life to protecting our eldest daughter if she is the only one left of my line. Her preparations left him momentarily speechless. She sounded as if a part of her had already assumed that the upcoming campaign would go terribly wrong. Still, he approved of her preparations. It was better to prepare for the worst than to do nothing. Chapter 7452 Early Tempering Plan. Chapter 7452 Early Tempering Plan. His wife held a lot of concerns about her children. It was in her nature as a mother to worry about their lives. Yet she always wanted her children to excel in their respective careers. Ambition burned within her tired eyes. I have spent a large amount of thought about the meaning of the Age of Dawn. She whispered to VS even as she shuffled closer to lean against his chest. This is an age of gods and miracles. It is to our benefit that we have entered the start of it. Think about it. We previously lived through the age of mechs that has run for over 4 centuries. All of the early movers have already monopolized most of the power and resources available in our society. The wars had already been fought and the power plays had already resulted in the institutionalization of the Big Two, god pilots, star designers, grand admirals, and so on. The only way we could have risen to the top in the old system was to follow the rules set by others. The old system has crumbled. VS responded. Exactly, dear. An opportunistic glint shone on his wife's eyes. We no longer have to play by other people's rules. knowing that the established powers are far better at playing this game than us. The Age of Dawn has put everything into disarray. In this grand reshuffling of power, brand new ways of climbing to the top have emerged. You have already done so by gaining the allegiance of hundreds of human phase lords. Unlike most pioneers who mindlessly kept obeying the old rules, you willfully violated them and took advantage of opportunities that everyone else has missed. This is the kind of attitude that a winner must possess in the early phases of every age cycle. You sound as if you have conducted a study on this subject. Gloriana briefly grinned. I have, in fact. I dove into the historical archives and skimmed through the accounts of the winners and losers of every age. Did you know what I found? The latter always consisted of those who behaved more proactively than their peers. The latter more often than not consisted of established groups who had grown far too comfortable in their own skin. Their stability allowed them to extract the greatest amount of benefits in their golden era. But as soon as the circumstances had undergone a drastic change, that same stability held them back from adapting quickly. This pattern occurs so often that I have concluded that we must be braver if we wish to thrive in the Age of Dawn. She was very correct in her assertion. VS knew from his understanding of biology that species that evolved to adapt extremely well in a specific ecosystem tended to do great during this stable timescale. However, no period lasted forever. Once the ecosystem became disrupted, the previously pampered species always found themselves struggling, with many of them going extinct outright. The species that tended to do a lot better during these transitions generally tended to be the species that previously struggled to occupy a niche under the oppression of the previously dominant species. Since the former had to work a lot harder to survive, many of them inherently possessed the capabilities that allowed them to adapt and thrive in different environments. This pattern was so universal that it had been observed on countless untamed planets in both the Milky Way and the Red Ocean. It could also be observed in domains beyond biology, as Gloriana had learned. What you have described is not an absolute rule, VS gently retorted. While I agree with you in principle, you are speaking of generalities. There are exceptions such as the Terrans. These people have declined over millennia since the peak of the Terran Empire, but always possess just enough flexibility to maintain their foundations in the next ages. There are also many enterprising groups and individuals who acted recklessly and suffered massive losses as a consequence. None of my actions can guarantee success. Sure, we enjoy greater advantages than most, but it only takes one catastrophic misstep to see everything fall apart. We are still dancing on a knife's edge. His wife shook her head. It is better to strive for greatness when the opportunity arises than to settle for mediocrity for the rest of our lives. This is one of the lessons that your Larkinson clan has taught to me. I admit my judgment is tainted by all of our successes, but that only provides further proof that this age is practically made for us. The introduction of exotic radiation is the best accelerant to our ambitions. I am not blind to the consequences of failure, but I would not be a true Larkinson if I let my fears override my ambitions. That may be easy to say for adults like us, but our children are destined for greatness. Gloriana spoke with such conviction in her soft voice. Andraste wants to become the best warrior of her generation. Marvane wants to follow our footsteps and become an innovative mech designer like ourselves. Most parents would react to this by giving their children encouraging words, but not much more. Not us. We are different. We are Larkinsons. We are wealthy and capable enough to help our children realize their childish but precious ambitions. One of the essential steps that we must take is the opposite of what many parents are doing, which is to flee as far away from active war zones as possible and raise their offspring in the safest and most peaceful regions imaginable. He understood her point. She had become a strong believer in the premise that a harsh and challenging environment tempered the greatest heroes. Though she used to start off as a pampered and privileged scion of the Woden dynasty herself, she may have convinced herself that she had become just as deserving of greatness as her much more successful husband due to accompanying him throughout all of his wild expeditions. VS had plenty of ideas on how to temper his children, but he did not want to go too far with them. Andraste had not yet reached her 10th birthday, though it was awfully close. Marvane was far too young to consider such matters. The only reason why the possibility even existed was because his learning and maturation rate was uncommonly high. So what do you propose we do for our children? He asked as he decided to throw the ball in her court. Bringing Andraste and Marvane along with us as we journey behind enemy lines is dangerous, but an essential part to teaching them the reality of living in a dangerous time and galaxy, Gloriana meticulously said. In order to justify the risks of doing so, we must ensure that they will be able to make the most of this experience. Though young, our children should not be treated as passengers, but very young trainees. That was her true intention. Though it sounded ridiculous for a pair of preteens to actively participate in a major military campaign, it was not entirely impossible in this case. VS still held very high authority in the Larkinson clan, and his control over the Blue Jay fleet was significant. It should not be particularly difficult to arrange a few easy but fulfilling side jobs for his kids. Perhaps they might not be as useful as university-educated interns, but their study programs already exceeded that of most first-raters at the same age ranges. I think your proposal has merit, he slowly said. I still insist that our kids should enjoy their time as kids. We cannot diminish their free time too much. We would be doing them a disservice by depriving them of the hours they spend on playing and fooling around. My suggestion would be to cut back on the time they spend on learning book knowledge and fill up the free slots with light work sessions. While they are not qualified to do anything more than odd jobs, these are still valuable opportunities to learn the principles of hard work and diligence. They can also come into contact with soldiers or workers who can impart valuable stories and lessons. He thought back on his own early and highly formative years as a mech designer. From starting his business on Cloudy Curtain to getting drafted into the military by the Bright Republic, a part of VS still thought fondly of those early years. Sure, he might have shed his innocence and naivete at a distressingly fast rate, but all of those dangerous and exciting experiences also built him up to become a leader of his generation. Did he want his children to undergo similar experiences? Hell no. VS would rather settle on the next best solution, which was to control their exposure to risk and ease their way into a more dangerous but rewarding life. Dangers could not be negated entirely, but he could do his best to minimize them while still making the experiences authentic enough to leave a profound impact on his children. The goal was not to traumatize his children, but to allow them to learn valuable life lessons firsthand that they could never truly understand in a classroom. VS inwardly chuckled. Back when he was still an apprentice mech designer, he used to rage at the Bright Republic for recklessly and wastefully forcing mech designers into active war zones. Yet it was exactly because of this policy that the Bright Republic fostered a community of hardy, tempered, and less frivolous mech designers. The removal of a lot of potential deadweight made his old state a lot more efficient over the long term, allowing it to maintain equilibrium with the then larger and more formidable Vija kingdom. Of course, all of that had turned into ancient history a long time ago. VS did not even recognize the Komodo star sector of the present day anymore. Though he would never put his children through such a dangerous and callous trajectory, he could still give them more moderate exposure to stuff they would have to deal with in the future. We can have Andraste do odd jobs with the infantry assigned to our ships, VS mused. Naturally, she won't be accompanying them when they go on their deployments. Boarding enemy warships and landing into hostile alien cities is no place for a kid, even if she is skilled with both blades and firearms. I think it is already enough for her to learn how to clean and maintain equipment, participate in virtual training sessions, voice her opinions during planning sessions, and maintain overwatch through a remote-controlled drone. His wife smiled. Andraste will definitely be ecstatic if she can control a drone. It is not as good as fighting the aliens in person, but it is best if she is able to spill alien blood on occasion. Ordinary parents would definitely feel horrified at the thought of letting young children take the lives of sentient beings, even if they were enemies of the human race. Neither VS nor Gloriana fit into the category of ordinary children. Perhaps it was too much to expose a little boy as young as Marvane to bloodshed even if it took place from a distance, but Andraste should be more than up to the task of killing. Her designer genes included plenty of bioprogramming that allowed her to cope with the heavy consequences of taking lives much better. Other enhancements, both planned and unplanned, should ensure her mentality should largely remain within a healthy range even if she ended up spilling human blood. As for Marvane, we can have him tag along with the maintenance crews as they do their work. VS continued. He already spends time with us in the design department as we work, but he won't be able to learn all that much from us at this stage of his development due to his limited scientific foundation. It is better to increase his exposure to the practical side of mechs and machinery. He can even learn how to operate simple machinery that is responsible for cleaning or conducting light repairs. If he is doing well, we can gradually elevate his responsibilities. There is always work to do on a carrier during an active expedition or campaign. Chapter 74-53 Internships. Chapter 74-53 Internships. The next day, VS and Gloriana took their two children aside to inform them of their new schedule. Predictably, the two kids reacted with excitement, as they lacked a complete understanding of the risks involved. Will I be able to accompany the troops and fight the aliens directly? Can I ride along in the cockpit of one of our mechs? Dice told me that a true warrior can only be forged in battle. My sword is ready. A blade that isn't watered with blood will rust over time. VS raised his hand after enduring the nagging of his over-enthusiastic brats. Calm down, calm down. Your mother and I will never permit you to fight the enemy directly. You can throw away all fantasies about accompanying our boarding troops into hostile vessels or occupying a second seat in a mech on deployment. No matter how clever you have become, you are still kids and very young ones at that. Be grateful for what we are willing to extend to you. Ordinary parents would never let you do this stuff. That calmed the two children for a bit. Gloriana bent down to her knees and pressed her palms against their cheeks. I hope the two of you can forgive us for infringing on your right to be children. We love you, but that is also the reason why we do not want to smother you with comfort and peace. We have thought about sending you back to a safe location such as New Constantinople 8, but we have decided not to because we think you will be much better prepared to face the challenges of the future if you are already taking part in our work. I am fine, Mama. Andraste leaned into her mother's touch. I am not as big of a girl as Aurelia, but I am more than willing to become an intern. Me too, Marvane said. Putting mechanos together is fun and all, but they are just toys in the end. Working with real mechs is much more exciting. I want to take those big machines apart and see what they are like inside. VS briefly smiled at them. I am glad to hear that you are fully on board with our idea. That said, the two of you need to take your new assignments seriously. We are bestowing you the duties that are normally assumed by adults. This means that we expect the both of you to learn the professionalism of your guides and imitate them as much as possible. We do not expect you to perform at their level, so do not push yourselves too hard. Leave the actual work to the professionals. You are there to learn. After making sure their children knew what to expect, Gloriana briefly explained their specific assignments. We would prefer to station you on a Larkinson ship, but we do not want the two of you to become separated from us. The Tarask may not be the largest ship in the combined fleet, but she is still the safest hull on a comprehensive basis. We have negotiated with the Meshers to embed you into their units for a test period. If there are any problems or too many disturbances, we will end this trial, understand? Both children nodded. Andraste, you will be splitting time between two different infantry units. You will first begin to learn the basics of soldiery, discipline, conventional firearms and small-scale tactics with the help of a squad of the RA's elite commandos. After you have proven you can learn how to operate alongside well-trained and highly disciplined career soldiers, we will allow you to spend time with the RC's Second Apocalypse Wardens. These are the bodyguards that you often see around us. Their combat methods, gear and doctrines are on a different level. They encapsulate the results of many advancements made since the start of the Age of Dawn. The Apocalypse Wardens fight more closely according to your talents and inclinations. The red-headed girl practically jumped with energy when she heard that she could actually learn a thing or two from the Apocalypse Wardens. Their dramatic names already hinted at their amazing combat power. Despite not possessing the sheer destructive scale of mechs, their cutting-edge infantry-grade equipment combined with the powers bestowed by their considerable attainments in chi cultivation allowed them to fight at a level far beyond any infantry squad from the previous age. As one of the Red Collective's flagship battalions, the Second Apocalypse Wardens also received an upgrade to their combat armor and a portion of their armaments. Although not all of the Apocalypse Wardens received the latest upgrades, the Collies made sure to assign the unit attached to VS with the latest versions of mid-grade superdimensional gear. Though VS felt that the relatively early implementation of superdimensional technology had a lot of room for improvement and optimization, the raw power of superdimensional alloys still transformed the combat power of the Apocalypse Wardens to another level. They could easily defeat 10 times their former selves due to this expensive upgrade alone. Andraste clearly understood this disparity as well. Though her parents had limited her exposure to superdimensional combat gear out of safety concerns, she yearned to wield a true superdimensional sword, just like her sword maiden mentors. A hand suddenly patted the top of her head, causing her to feel belittled. Hey, I am a big girl now. Whatever you say, pumpkin. VS responded with an indulgent smile. Do not get ahead of yourself. I am sure that your instructors have drilled into your mind that weapons are not toys, but you are still so young that we are not quite sure the lesson has stuck. Your internship will expose you to a lot of deadly stuff. Prove to us that you can act responsibly around them. Becoming a soldier is a duty, not a reward. As long as you can prove that you understand this distinction, we will give you a surprise when you are ready to move on to greater responsibilities. This promise clearly lit the little girl up. I love you, Papa. Haha, I love you too, VS gently said before turning to his youngest child. Marvane, as for you, we do not expect you to work as hard as your sister. Your sessions are shorter and your work assignments will not be as arduous. Don't look disappointed. Your schooling is still important and you have many more years to gain practical experience. That said, we think it is good for your development to spend a few hours a week auditing one of the RA maintenance crews assigned on this ship. The Meshers work substantially differently from Larkinsons like us, but their professionalism with anything related to mechs is not in doubt. Gloriana gave her son a stern look. Safety comes first, boy. You will obey the orders of your supervisors. You will not attempt to deviate from your instructions unless you have gained explicit permission. You will not approach any mech up close unless it is completely secured and locked down. In any other case, you are only permitted to interact with mechs from a distance and preferably inside a well-protected control room. While the Meshers hold themselves to a high standard, accidents can always happen, particularly during high-intensity combat scenarios. Damaged machines can topple over. Overloaded power reactors can leak deadly radiation. Scalding hot coolant can melt the hazard suits of unprepared workers. Even if you are wearing a luxurious high-performing personal shield generator, that is no excuse to take your safety lightly. She had good reasons to be concerned about safety. The hangar bays of the Tarrasque may be built to very high specifications. All of the redundant safety measures could easily become compromised if the section suffered direct hits from enemy attacks. Though VS believed it would be difficult for any enemy to target the Tarrasque under heavy escort, he could never rule out the possibility. Therefore, no one aboard the ship could take their safety for granted. This included non-combatants such as Gloriana, who would ordinarily be stationed well inside the citadel of the heavy cruiser. "Will I be able to make suggestions of my own?" the little boy asked. "Can I put together a basic machine with the machines?" Possessing an inquisitive mind is one of the essential traits of a successful mech designer. VS answered. "Though you are limited by your age, you will still obtain limited opportunities to take part in discussions and operate many different kinds of production machines. However, everything you do will remain under supervision from professionals who know what they are doing. Each of them will receive an express instruction to err on the side of caution. You are still many years away from putting together a real mech." Both VS and Gloriana regarded their son's love for the technical side of mechs with fondness. It was only too bad that he had been born too late to do anything truly serious. Letting him assist with light repairs and routine maintenance already stretched the boundary as far as they were concerned. "Will I be able to work on a powerful ace mech like the Riot Mark III? Marvane suddenly asked. "Absolutely not." Gloriana's tone clearly broke no argument. "Do not even think about it. Every ace mech is a carefully designed engine of power and destruction. Even if they are much better designed and built than mass production mechs, the consequences of failure are also that much greater. This is particularly pronounced when it comes to the Riot Mark III, which is a machine that not only harms our enemies, but also the pilot herself and people around her. You will never be stationed in the same compartment as this dangerous machine. Only a fool or a sadistic bastard would ever consider it a good idea to bring an innocent young child in the vicinity of a powerful but barely contained D-mech of this level. Even if VS was brain damaged enough to permit this action, Marvane wouldn't learn anything aside from sheer terror. The Riot Mark III was far too advanced for a student of his level to learn anything meaningful about mech design. There were good reasons why particularly powerful and high-end mechs kept their distance from the general population. Their sheer power and visual impact often distorted the psychologies of ordinary people. The greater the disparity, the greater the impact on their minds. It may be fine to let people get in touch with virtual mechs or view their performance on a projected feed, but true proximity had to be avoided as much as possible. This especially applied to impressionable young children. Neither VS nor Gloriana wanted to contaminate their youngest child too much too soon. They did not want Marvane to become obsessed with their approach towards mechs to the point he could only imitate their works. He deserved to shape his own unique vision and design philosophy towards mechs. This was also another reason why both parents found it better to restrict Marvane's contact to the RA first-class multipurpose mech stationed on the Tarrasque. The meshers had access to a lot of excellent design philosophies as well as high technologies. This ubiquitous access did not drive them crazy. VS had learned from his talks with Jovi that RA mech designers went through strict training in order to learn restraint and discipline. They could not wantonly waste the association's resources, nor abuse advanced technologies when more low-end solutions sufficed. VS believed that the RA could teach Marvane the right starting foundation with regards to mech design. There should be plenty of opportunities in the future for VS to shape his son into a more adventurous mech designer, but first he needed to master the fundamentals. If he was able to do so a decade in advance, then that would grant him more time to delve into the deeper and more profound aspects of mech design when he had reached an adolescent stage. Exler. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.